This boy can take out some of the strongest monsters out with just one punch. The strongest hero saves him and takes him in as his disciple. No, not you, Deku, get out of here. And trains him to become the maximum hero. The world was divided into two different factions, the good and the evil. Both parties have been fighting since the beginning of time, which has continued for many eras and was scattered in different regions of the planet. As the battle between the two continued, their names had changed as the time went by, but their fate did not, and still remains the same. Their fight truly never stops, until one day, after the death of many people on each side, they both reach their limits and grow tired of fighting endlessly, so leaders of both parties decided to stop and form an alliance. The fight that had lasted for many centuries had ended, and the villains decided to make their own country and work alongside humankind instead of conquering them, and they called it the Republic of Naruraka. Many people were against living alongside them, mostly the people who lost their loved ones to the villains. The alliance of good and evil continue to prosper, and the normal people accept them as time goes by. It was truly an era of peace, and the term heroes and villains was completely forgotten and remained only as a memory. That was what most people believed, but unbeknownst to them, villains continue to attack, even in present times, and heroes are also there lurking and waiting to hunt them down. The story starts introducing Han Kang-chi, a student who wants to be a number one student at something, but unfortunately he is not good with his studies, sports, and anything else. In short, he is literally good for nothing. He thought that every person has at least one thing they may be good at. That made him wonder that he has maybe one thing hidden inside him. Hopefully, it's not just the power of friendship. As he continued to walk and wondering about things, he really is a thinker, he encountered two people. One bald guy and one big-lipped guy with a wig on. The two invited Han Kang-chi to talk with them, telling him that he has special aura around him. Han Kang-chi blushed and was happy to hear those words, so he believed it and he followed them without any hesitation and any second thoughts. After reaching an alleyway, they showed their true colors and asked him for money. But Han Kang-chi said he has no money with a straight face, and honestly, I would probably be the same. The bald guy initiated that if he had no money to give both of them, then Han Kang-chi should just give the money only to him, and the two of them started an argument. Han Kang-chi saw this opportunity to leave, but he was spotted immediately. This guy really thought he could just get away without getting caught lacking. The two bullies had lost their patience for asking Han Kang-chi for money, so they started to literally hurt him. The bald guy slaps Han Kang-chi endlessly, but to minimize the damage, Han Kang-chi raises his guard up, asking for him to stop it, and he instinctively swings a punch at the bald guy, slapping and hitting him in the face, causing him to fly. The big-lipped guy was literally terrified about the thing that he had just bore witness to. But still, he wanted to avenge his comrade, so he charged towards Han Kang-chi. Han Kang-chi is feeling confident now, so he swung a punch at the coming enemy and it blasted the delinquent literally 30 meters away. This guy honestly just reminds me of Saitama. Han Kang-chi could not believe what he had done and started to think he was actually unbelievably strong. He also thought that this may be a talent that will be able to make him the number one he ever so desired. The next day, he told what happened yesterday to his friend and even bragged about how he will be able to achieve being number one now because of this talent. But still, his friend is not amazed by this revelation and stated facts about how he can use his strength and his physical power. He explained that there are two ways he can use it. First is by becoming an athlete and representing the country across the world. But in order to become a professional athlete, he really needs to invest and hire professional trainers that will cost him money. In addition to that, participating in competitions also costs a huge amount of money. The second option is, of course, joining the military, but the job is risky and the only safe departments are security, justice, civil service, but many people apply for this position every single year, which is impossible to get in if you're not good enough. So it seems that our boy's options that were just given to him just don't make the cut. His friend suggested that he should just focus on his studies because there are more talented people out there than him, and this man is steady hating. But his friend suggests that there is one thing that requires no money and only strength, and that is joining a literal mafia gang. Han Kang-chi joined a group of gangs named the Mischief Gang. The boss of the gang walks in like he thinks he's some big shot and walks towards Han Kang-chi and tells him that what he has done being a gangster boss. Han did not like what he heard, so he beat them into a literal pulp. Han Kang-chi then went to the park to see his dad and demanded to send him to an academy, but his father laughed at him because he had no skills, and they did not have the money to be able to enter one. Also, his father is a literal beggar, and he uses his light-skin Riz to get money from the two girls passing by. This guy really is just an awesome dude. Instead, his father gave him a poster and told him that he should go to this place. Han is like, "Don't you know to throw trash out?" And then he's like, no, just take the poster. Han then reads the poster, and it is written that there is no education required, no work experience required, and it really does welcome strong people. It piques the interest of our boy Han Kang-chi. When he arrived at the place, he immediately entered. The focus then shifted to an unemployed man with yellow hair, confused if it was the right place, but in the end he decided to also go in. It was revealed that the unemployed man with yellow hair was Dae Young. He wants a job, so he entered this with no academic background and no work experience as well, which was the only place that accepted his application. He used the elevator to reach the upper floor, and then he met the clerk of the first branch named Kim Tani. Dae Young was starstruck by her beauty. Kim Tani explained that they haven't got a single applicant in the past 12 years. That made Dae Young happy because there are no competitors and will immediately get hired. But the clerk introduced him to another applicant, which is Han Kang-chi, and that made him think that he is quite unfortunate. After waiting for a bit, the two of them got interviewed and they asked a bunch of questions like a normal job interview. But the guy with the red hair, named Kim Hwa-rang, one of the 8 trigrams and has the nickname the Flame Warrior, intervened and said that they should skip to the important questions. He immediately asks them if they are strong, and the two of them are shocked for a second. But after hearing that, Han Kang-chi replied yes, very confidently, and that made them automatically pass the interview. And this really confused Dae Young and Kim Tani. After the interview, Kim Hwa-rang walked out of the room, and Kim Tani followed her, asking that they should follow the guidelines of the headquarters and do some physical and mental ability tests. Kim Hwa-rang realized that Kim Tani was right, so he had a very bright idea. He gave the yellow craft card that will be able to make them a hero almost automatically without doing a single test. Kim Tani was against the idea because being a hero is dangerous and they literally could get murdered in the scenes. Kim Hwa-rang became angry because of the back-to-back refusals Kim Tani made, giving her no choice but to follow what Kim Hwa-rang said because he gave her a very devious look. Back at the room, an employee explained about the job they have accepted, and Dae Young was shocked by the revelation and wanted to quit the job because he thought that they provide illegal services. But he immediately forgot about it in an instant and changed his mind when the company offered 4 major insurances and even a performance bonus. So I guess this guy really just cares about money. I really need money as well. The company employee then led them to supply room, where they will get the transformation clothes or work clothes that they will use. Aside from the transformation suit, they will also be given a laser gun, which has no batteries, and they have been instructed to buy it on the first floor. So the two of them go down to the first floor wearing the transformation suit, and then they receive a message from the company about the store where they will be buying at. Dae Young immediately recognizes the mascot of the store, who is called Cheap, and that made it easier for them to locate the store, which is in Narumi Lake. So they get on the taxi and head to their destination. After arriving at the park, they immediately notice that there are ongoing festivals, which make it harder to find Cheap. After walking for a while, they noticed a crowd in a particular area. They looked into it, and they finally saw Cheap in a stage performing. All of the people were overjoyed because of Cheap, and she had a really cute presence, and people fell in line to take a picture besides Cheap one by one. Han Kang-chi and An Dae-young were the last guests to have a picture with Cheap, and after that, they revealed that they are with the heroes. By their surprise, Cheap was already informed and was also waiting for them to arrive. And it is revealed that Cheap is a secret agent for the heroes and will both give them an item that they will be needing in their future endeavors. After the conversation, Cheap led them to an alleyway and pointed at the trash can. He told them that he hid the secret item there. When An was about to pee, Cheap slit his throat in a split second, unable for them to react, and he rushed towards Han and choked him against the wall. Cheap's personality changed, and he revealed that he was a monster that was holding back his hunger in front of humans that he wanted to eat so badly. Cheap opened his mouth and chomped Han Kang-chi's right arm. Right when Han was about to pass out, he punched Cheap at the side of his stomach, causing Cheap to be more angry. Cheap blew a straight punch as a reply and retaliation, and Han was not able to dodge it. When Cheap finally went to go eat Han, a guy with long hair and a fan as his weapon arrived to stop this massacre from happening. Chapter starts and the guy literally blocks this devious bear's attack with a simple fan, and its tongue is literally frozen. The bear says that it cannot move his body, and then the guy is like, yeah, of course. He wonders who the hell this guy is, because he literally cannot move a millimeter. The guy with the fan gives him a devious look, and then launches him away. The bear calls him a piece of crap and asks, who the heck are you? He says that he is a hero, and he begins to walk towards him. And he doesn't even bat an eye. He gives a disgusting look towards the bear and is like, what the heck did you think? He is part of the hero's first branch and is the second trigram. His nickname is the Wind Elf, Yon Pung. The bear is like, of course he's a hero, how can I not see that? And this kind of looks like Kung Fu Panda, but gone rogue, of course. The bear says that he's on a whole nother level, and he approaches her, or it, with his dark aura circulating behind him. I thought this was Sung Jin-woo for a second. He then gives her a stare, and the bear says, compared to those losers I fought earlier, this guy's on another level. The bear, or Cheap, says, wait a minute. And then Cheap says, Araka has a peace treaty with mankind. You didn't forget, did you? And then he just says, what sort of joke is that? Even in this situation, you could still think about that? And then we see the dude dead, and then of course Han, with his arm literally bitten off. He puts away his hair and says, honestly, I really don't care, because he's going to kill Cheap either way. And Cheap looks like it literally pissed its pants. He then jumps up to the air and hopes to escape. And then he says he is really dangerous because he had that symbol on his left hand. Cheap says he is definitely one of the 8 trigrams and that he needs to escape, because if he doesn't, then he is dead. As he is jumping across the buildings, our boy, the Wind Elf, literally comes up in front of him like a jump scare, and we see a crash to the ground. Cheap says, just wait a second. Please wait a moment. Cheap says that those guys suddenly attacked me and I panicked. And then we see him just walking, and he seems to not even bat an eye. He then wonders and says, why bother surrendering? I'm still going to eliminate you. And then the bear says, If a villain surrenders, isn't it your duty to save and reform them? That's the righteous path. And then he just says, reform? You must be kidding me. And then he gives a menacing look, and he raises his fan, and a surge of aura flows around him. The bear is there sitting, and he sees the monstrous attack called the Tempest of the Blade, second evolution. Tempest, Tunnel, Strike. And he strikes cheap. As we can see, the man just smiles menacingly. And then the bear yells out to save me. And then Dae Young opens his eyes and is like, who the heck is this guy? Let's go. I thought that An really just got wrecked. He then sees the attack going on. And then he says that guy is a hero because he's literally bombarding Cheap with his monstrous attacks. The bear then says, I can go back if I transform now. And he says, just a little more. Just a little more. And then boom. We then see him transform into something huge. He becomes a full-out monster. And we see that by his new fangs that have emerged. The Wind Elf is like, it finally came to light. And then Cheap says, you're quite the formidable hero. It is a final stage of the yellow class monster Chief. And then he says, I'm impressed by your strength, Wind Elf, but I'm afraid you must surrender because once he activates that form, there is nobody who can defeat it. And we see this guy's back muscles and he is freaking huge. He says, what the heck? And then he wonders why his side is torn off. And then he remembers it's the punch that our boy gave him earlier. Kang-chi really is strong. Wind Elf looks at him, and then he backs up quickly, and he yells out, ah! He laughs and says something was wrong a moment ago, but I could not care less. And then Cheap says it doesn't change the fact that it really has to become stronger. And then the guy just approaches him, not even opening his eyes with his aura circulating around him. Cheap yells, saying, I'll rip you apart. But unfortunately, it gets sliced instantly by the Tempest of the Blade 6th evolution, and his mouth is literally sliced to pieces, and as well as the rest of his body. It is the attack of the Arcane Overflow release. And this guy is literally just walking with his hands behind his back. This guy is so cool. He says, how is his condition? And then the girl says that his vitals are unstable, but he's no longer in a critical condition, and they are using an advanced regenerative technique to restore the severed arm. She then says it's nothing short of a miracle that he is alive because he lost so much blood. And then we see him literally sweating, and she says that he's fighting to survive. He then says that he's completely mediocre, and then we see him behind a pole watching as this entire thing unfolds previously. He says that he was completely mediocre only until he got his arm torn off. But he gave a look in his eyes with fierce power, and he loaded up a punch and punched the bear in his side. He then calls out to the elf girl, helping Han, and then he asks if the craft is still around. She says there are no other registered threats beyond the one chief, and he asks, really? But then she says that there is one, but it is quite far. She says that the craft's color is green, and that it's been approximately 5 hours since its emergence. But then we see it, and she mentions it is a half-human, and that the situation falls under the purview of the second branch. And then she also mentioned that it is classified as green, indicating that it doesn't really require the involvement of a higher-level supervisor. But then he says, inform the second branch to refrain from taking action. And she is confused as she has a radar. Like what? And then he says that he'll be going there by himself. And he asks how long it'll take for our boy Han's arm to be restored. She says about 20 minutes. But why? And then he says that he really is curious about something, as he's carrying Han over his shoulder, and he wants to go confirm it. He says, I want to see whether the new applicant is interesting. And then we see him, and he is still fighting to even stay alive. and the chapter comes to a pretty epic end. I know that our boy Han is about to do something awesome. The green rank unknown monster then explained that he only takes care of the people who bullied him in their office. But being powerful made him mad, resulting in killing a lot of people, and still wanted to test his powers by trying to exterminate Han Kang-ji. He charged towards him, but fortunately, Han manages to dodge it, and he's wearing something on his neck. And of course, it literally says, "I will eliminate all of you." He is like, what is happening? And he says that just now he was sure that there was a terrifying sheep just trying to attack him, and that it ate its arm. He wonders how he has it, because it's still there. And then the crocodile thing jumps behind him and tries to attack him once more. He dodges it by a hair, and the crocodile guy says, "You think I'm freaking weak, right?" And then he grabs him by his face, but just then he loads up a punch and punches him in its stomach. But it seems that nothing happens, and he just says that it is so annoying. He says, "You're gonna keep ignoring me, huh?" And he literally slams him like that. We then see he also mentions that he's not a weak man, and then he wonders if he is just too strong. And then the wind guy literally appears out of nowhere, and then he gets jump scared like, "What the heck? Who are you?" And then the wind elf says, "So that was just a coincidence." And then he asks, "When did you come here? You wanna die, huh?" But just at that moment, Han literally stands up, and he seems to have an orange spirit around him, and he gives him a very menacing look with red eyes that are glowing. And then we see the crocodile monster, and he is like, there's no way he is alive. Just then, he loads up his power in his arms, and his veins start to literally get bigger. He says this cannot happen, and that he has to literally eliminate Han. We then see a battery, and then it seems to be halfway charged. His arm becomes so freaking huge, and he goes to punch Han, and then he says, "This is so exciting." But then Han did not even move a single inch. And he is like, that is not possible. We then see the battery, and it has gotten to a maximum charge. Han looks at him, furious, and loads up a punch in his left hand. And he attacks him just as the battery has reached its maximum charge. Boom! We see him literally punch the side of the monster, and it gets blown off, and this guy literally is just like Saitama. The wind elf is like, what the heck? And we see the hole here like it was a sea monster from One Punch Man. The monster gets literally thrown back like 12,000 meters, and he falls on his knees, and the wind elf just looks at him. He says, "It's been a while, huh?" And then he gives a wide grin and says, "Interesting guy, you're back." And then he says, "Kim Gi-ho." And then he's like, wait, what? Just at that moment, we go back to the Seoul Center, and we arrive at Utopia. It is some sort of nightclub, and we see people in there literally getting lit. We also see a DJ, some girl dancing, and a whole bunch of fun. We then see some goat or whatever, and then he says, "Utopia, you're partners who have the same dreams as us." And he says that he is sure that their relationship can always be trusted. But he also mentions that the superiors have some doubts. And then we see the news article that a Bear Chief YouTuber went missing, and it is Chief. We then see somebody about to lift the cover of a silver platter, and there is steak under, and honestly, I'm ready to eat, guys. I don't know about you. The guy says, if you're tempted by the bright light marble and start cooking it because you can't wait to taste it, you'll be very disappointed. He also mentions that freshly slaughtered meat still contains mussels and reduces acidity due to the lactic acid, and that no matter how good the chef is, the meat is almost impossible to be cooked properly. He then slices the meat and wonders how he can eat such delicious meat. And he lifts it up with his fork and says the answer is easy. and that you just need to wait. And it is actually a very beautiful lady that seems to be the leader of this faction. She says, until the enzymes and microbes tear and break up the meat, you have to let it rest and wait. And she is actually referring to the Hero Guild, and is just using a metaphor. She says, only then can you truly enjoy the meat. And then we see that that was actually just a mask. And then face literally goes up above, and we see a really disgusting looking set of teeth with a black jaw. She says, I'll let you taste it too. And this is a pretty disturbing panel, and the chapter comes to an end. We then see Hana wake up, and he seems to be on a hospital bed. He sits up, and I guess my guess was true. He then gets a flashback to those monsters and just looks at his hand. He then exits the room and he says, this is the company, right? And then we see his subordinate On as well as the Wind Elf, and they're in the room talking. He says that he would like to quit because he did not know that that's what it takes to be in a job like this. He says it is impossible, and then he remembers Cheap and says, it's too terrifying. And then he says also, as he raises his head, and then the Wind Elf is just like, what did you say? And then he bows his head again. And then he says, to be honest, compared to the villain I mentioned earlier, he is even more terrifying than a true monster. And then the Wind Elf just says, okay, just get off. And he says, I should have just let you to die, because you would have been better off dead. And he calls him a failure. And these are pretty mean words to say, especially to somebody who just had his throat literally cut. And Han heard all of this. The girl then goes up behind him and says, Master, you're here. And then he says that he is about to leave. She says, thank you for your hard work and get home safe. And he says, cut it out. And then he says, erase that yellow-haired coward's memory and send him home. And then the Wind Elf says, he's quite the spectacle, isn't he? He says, maybe it's because you were the one conducting the interview. He also mentions that even though there's no limit to who we can choose, why would we waste time on a coward like that? And then he looks back with a menacing look and he seems pissed. And then he asks her, what were you thinking when you accepted him? And then she says, apologies, as she remembers Kim Hwa-rang. And then he says, how's the sharp-haired guy? And she's like, what? She says, I was worried that his injuries were serious, but as soon as I entered the room, he... And then we go back to him, our boy Han. And then he says, I will continue working here. He says, I won't give up, and I won't quit. Kim Ta-ni is like, what? And just at that second, some dude comes running behind her and is like, there is a big problem and you need to check the news right now. He says, look at this horrific scene. And then scattered cotton and pink fur. And then we see a news reporter saying that these are the remains of the missing Cheap. He says that Cheap was loved for all his cute and kind nature, and he has now become the victim of a murder, but only if they knew the truth behind it. He says the police have stated that they will conduct a thorough investigation to uncover if anyone had the motive to harm Cheap, a resident of Naraka. And then the guy shouts that next year will be the 13th anniversary of the era of peace. It is on the TV, and he also mentions that those who cannot adjust to the times are villains. And then we see the Wind Elf or Yunpeng watching as Kim Ta-ni and the assistant are like, those are the true villains, those who rationalize their ways with barbaric violence. And he looks at it, and he is extremely pissed off. Kim Ta-ni is like, this is not good. And then I knew it. Yunpeng literally launches and punches the TV. And then he is like, why do I have to watch the wreckage on the news? It's because you didn't do your job right and you are incompetent. And then Kim Ta-ni is crying and she says, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. And then Kim Hwa-rang enters and is like, you need to take the neuropathy test. And her boy looks a lot more chill than last time. He says, you know the location of my hospital, right? And then Yunpeng is like, what did you just say? He says, isn't it ultimately the leader's responsibility? Or am I mistaking something, Peng son? He says, I thought I made it clear to never call me that again. and that if he has to remind him one more time that he will take his life. He says, "Why are you being menacing, punk son?" And he says, "Oops, I said it again." And then he gives a smile and says, "Where do you want to kill me? If you can, that is." And I think that this guy has gotten a bit too cocky. As they are about to fight, and there's dark aura around them, somebody yells, "Enough!" And then he says, "What the heck are you doing here?" And then he says, "Don't you realize what's going on in the case, and you're acting like complete kids?" He says, "You're embarrassing yourselves as heroes. It is a hero's director, the 6th of the 8 trigrams. His name is Chun Yul, and he is a guardian of the sky." He says, "What do you want to say, you carpet?" And then Hwarang is like, "Good afternoon, director." He then tells the Wind Elf, or Yun, "Have you seen the news? Have you not realized the gravity of this situation?" He says, as a monster chief had clearly reached the final stage of evolution. And then he says, "But what was found at the scene was a discarded piece of himself, and that this shouldn't be possible." Kim Tani is kind of nervous. And then he says that Tani is the most skilled technician that he has come across, and that he trusts her expertise and know that she would not make a mistake, and that the noise from the news will be handled by the headquarters. He says there are no leads connecting them to the incident, and the government will eventually also die down after making the statements. We then see scales of justice, and then the director says, "Though it may be unpleasant, they have to understand the importance of maintaining the balance of the era of peace." And then he says, "I, Director Suri Chun Yul, will take responsibility for the fate of the heroes." And then the Wind Elf Yun is just like, "Enough." He says, "Let's be honest, that's not the real reason you're here." He says, "I can't fool you, Pong." And then, of course, he doesn't like being called Pong, and he says, "I will literally punch you." He then calls out to Tani, and then he says, "I heard some interesting news from Hwarang this morning." And Tani is kind of confused, like, "What?" And then we get a picture, of course, of her boy Han. And then it says that there is a promising young intern in the first branch of the Heroes program. Hwarang smiles and says, "That is correct. Tani and I carefully choose him ourselves." He looks at Tani like, "Right." And then Tani is like, "Yeah." Chun is like, "A rookie who went up against a yellow and held out, huh?" He says he's really curious as he folds his arms. He gives a thumbs up and says, "That's why I, Lee Chun Yul, came running over immediately." And then, of course, Yun Pung is just leaving. He says, "By the way, I heard that you chose him without giving him the verification exam." And Tani says, "Yeah, we actually did that." He then mentions, "You can't do that. They are the headquarter guidelines, and yet you're just ignoring them." She says, "Apologies." And then Hwarang says, "I'll send him over right away." He then asks Yeon, "Any objections?" And then he also says, "I'm just a part-timer." And he smiles and says, "Great. Then since you're in agreement, you can take me there." And then he looks back at him, pissed like, "What the heck did you just say?" He says, "You don't have work this afternoon, right?" And then Pyeon is like, "So what?" And he tells somebody else to go do it. And then Chun is like, "It looks like you forgot the tradition of the branch master accompanying the new intern is unique to heroes." And then he puts his arms behind him and he's trying to tick our boy Yeon off. We then see a yin-yang symbol, and he says that it's a way for the master to show that they have personally chosen that intern. He says the second, third, and fourth branches all uphold that tradition, and it's also Yeon's responsibility as the first branch master to do so. And then he just says, "Are you sure I was the one who chose the intern?" And then he remembers, "Oh wait, I remember now. It was a joint decision made by you and the team. So you go instead." Chun then says, "Hwarang's patients rely on him, and that it would be irresponsible of us to pull him away from them for too long." And then he just laughs and mocks our boy Yeon, and he says, "It's not unfair for them. It's unfair to our heroes as well." And then he says, right? And he's really pissing Yeon off. We then see Yeon in the Tesla, or whatever whip he has, and then he keeps repeating to himself that he will one day eliminate all of these heroes. What the heck? This guy really is a peculiar one. He asks him, "Why don't you have a license? Is it because you're a sociopath who is really good for nothing?" And then Han says, "I'm just a high school student." And then Yeon just says, "Shut up." He asks, what is the verification training? And then Yeon responds, it's not much. It's just a test to determine if you have the potential to become a hero within a few days. And it is a verbal test, and even a piece of crap like you can pass it. He says after you get done with this, your job will be funner, and if you finished it and came back, he'll make sure to show him a good time. And I don't think I trust this guy because he looks very, very menacing after saying such a weird statement. And then our boy Han, still with his poker face, he asks, is it going to take a long time? Yeon is like, what? And then we see his beggar father, and he literally has bandages on his face because I think he got beaten up. And then he says, oh my gosh, you actually landed a job in this competitive job market. My son, you never cease to amaze me. And then our boy literally has a glistening aura around him. And then he also says, it's too bad you won't be able to see my beautiful smile for 3 days. And that it will be tough, but he really has to endure it. And then he mentions that his nose is bleeding. He asks Han if the work is worth it. He looks at his hand and he says, I guess it is. His father then says, he cannot fathom working outside for such a long period of time. 4 days and 3 nights. And then he wonders where is the supervisor, and he wonders if it is a guy over there. He then looks at him, and then Yeon looks back, giving him a very menacing look. And then he hides back in the bushes. And then he asks Han if, of course, Yeon has some private loans to give, and then he says that those eyes look familiar. We then see the fountain, and they just say that Han is going to leave now. And then he is like, already, huh? He then gives him a cowboy bebop look. And then he says, good luck, baby. And then Han just says a thumbs up and is like, yeah, you got it. Of course, Yeon is like, are you finished? Because we're leaving now. And he says, just one more place. It is the house of On. And he's wearing the Adidas. And I thought that this was really Adidas. And he has some bare shorts on. He says, who is it? And it is Han. And his house seems to be in the middle of the city. He says, what is this? Who are you? Then Han greets him, and then he just leaves. And Han is like, what a strange guy. And it seems that his memories have been wiped off. And then we see him look down, and it is 20,000 won. And then he says, thank you for paying the taxi. He gets in the car and is like, I'm ready to go now. And just at that moment, he looks back, and then he sees Han. Han says, excuse me, and he's like, what now? And then he says, thank you to Yeon for saving him back then. And then Yeon is just like, shut your trap, and this guy might be a tsundere. And then we see the car, and it rides off to the sunset. They arrived at the medical station and met a white-haired guy named Lee So-ek, the director of Heroes Medical. Yeon-pung and Lee So-ek immediately started an argument, thus showing that they have known each other for quite a long time. Lee So-ek shifted his attention to Han Kang-chi and asked why he joined the Heroes, and Han replied with a straight face like usual, and he says that he wanted to reach the top. Yeon-pung was shocked by his answer, but Lee So-ek already knew what he was thinking. Lee So-ek instructed one of his employees to escort Han Kang-chi to the examination room. Yeon decided to leave because he already did his part, but Lee is like, you want to have a cup of tea. But then, of course, Yeon-pung just turns it down because he doesn't like tea. Lee So-ek already had a plan B in mind and prepared. Yeon-pung, a beverage that he cannot deny. And so, they started talking about the past in the office. Lee So-ek was intrigued why he personally escorted Han Kang-chi, and Yeon-pung said that he thought the kid was interesting because he showed him some surprising things when they first met. He decided to go home, but to his surprise, Han Kang-chi was walking towards his direction and said that he was disqualified and had been told to go back where he came from. Yeon-pung was shocked because it was a basic test that anyone can literally pass. The employee that escorted him clarified the things to Yeon-pung. He said that the kid can't even handle basic, so they really had to disqualify him. They got back to the first branch company and discovered that Han Kang-chi is undeniably an idiot who can't do even basic things like multiplication. Everyone was shocked by this discovery, while Yunpeng was so angry about the situation. He immediately draws his weapon and unleashes his skill towards Han, and wishes for him to die. But Kim Ta-ni and Chun-yul immediately stop it. Kim Ta-ni and Chun-yul talked about these past incidents, and they thought that the monster's approach of attacking them is quite different from the way that they have been attacking them from the past, which led to the conclusion that maybe somehow there is a reason for it to change. The focus then shifts to an apartment which a group of high school students heard about the news about the murder of Cheap. The other person thinks that this is a terrifying thing to do and what will happen to the country, while the other person told him that it does not affect them in any way whatsoever, so they should just do their own thing. In the other room of the apartment, a big bulky guy wearing another armor seems to have a connection with Cheap, also watching the news regarding the death of Cheap. The chapter starts, and meanwhile, Dae Young was chilling in his house watching his favorite comedy show on TV. He receives a call from his mother, which he just ignored. After her sister saw what he did, she kicked his ass off the couch and started yelling at him. His sister, An Ji-yu, shuts the door of her room after she scolds her brother. But she immediately got out of her room and kicked him once again in the back after he messed with the stuff regarding the flyers. She said that the flyers were just samples, which her company had sent. Dae Young was planning to apply for the job, but he realized that a job with no experience and no age requirement was too good to be true. Ji-yu was enraged because the Branch 1 spread the sample flyers and contacted them, but unfortunately they did not respond, and thus making her angrier, and decided to go there in person. It was later revealed that Ji-yu was connected with the 4th branch and an intern who was aspiring to become an ace. Dae Young got out of the house to eat outside using the money his sister gave him. While eating some ramen, he received a text message regarding his job, and he got declined again. Right when he was about to go home, he bumped into a tall and muscular guy and fell to the ground. He picked up his beanie and remembered something about Han, and wondered why did Han Kang-chi manage to bring back his lost beanie even though he did not know him. He immediately stood up, and the muscular guy apologized for bumping into him, and Dae Young accepted his apology and said he is okay. Dae Young watched TV all night long and wondered why his sister did not still come back home. He speculates that maybe she got drunk again. As the doorbell rang, he expected that it would be his sister, but when he opened the door, there was nothing, and that made him confused. Who would have done it if it was not his sister? He was worried, so he was about to call his sister, but suddenly, a tall and muscular guy that he bumped earlier into appeared out of nowhere and attacked Dae Young and proposed a devious little game. Meanwhile, Ji-yu was found in the front of Branch 1 office, but she was scared to enter because the masters in those branches are known to be very violent. She chickened out at the last second and decided to go back home. But when she was about to flee, she noticed Branch 1 intern Kang-chi, our boy Han, going out of Branch 1. Han Kang-chi was walking back to his home carrying a book about basic mathematics given to him by Kim Ta-ni. Han Kang-chi realized that being a hero is not an easy feat to do, but at the same time, he also thinks that he's one step closer to becoming a hero. Han reminisced about a past where a person was protecting him. His name was Gang-chi. Gang-chi protected Han by hiding him in a closet, and for some reason, that guy resembles Yunpeng. Han was surprised when he saw Dae Young while going back home. He asked Dae Young if his memories had already returned, and Dae Young replied with a yes, but things seemed very fishy. And he also told him that he was waiting for him while secretly holding a knife behind his back to stab him. The tall and muscular guy was hiding in a corner, thrilled and happy of what was happening before his eyes. Dae Young was threatened by the tall and muscular guy that attacked him in his apartment and had to choose between his family and Han Kang-chi, and he decided to choose to eliminate Han to save his family. Dae Young, who does not have a choice, was about to stab Kang-chi, but suddenly his sister arrived and kicked the tall, muscular guy in the face, and that made Dae Young stop what he was about to do. The tall and muscular guy then asked who the heck is she, and she replied that she was a hero. He then realized that it was Dae Young's sister. She immediately charged forward and did an uppercut that caused the enemy to be blasted 20 meters away. Ji-Yu unleashes her power that makes her borrow the characteristics of a dog, and she charges so fast at the enemy, but the enemy reads her moves amidst her speed. The enemy was about to catch her, but she immediately changed her direction, jumping towards his blind spot. To her surprise, the back of the enemy has an open mouth in his back. What the heck? Revealing his true nature as a monster. Ji-Yu suffered damage, causing her arms to bleed severely. The monster then transformed to its final stage, and it was known as Beast Big Judy, a yellow-grayed monster. Dae Young was shocked about what he had just saw, and he was confused because he just now realized that his sister was a hero, and that the tall and muscular guy transformed into a literal scarier monster than earlier, and in order to save his sister's life, he thinks of a possible solution to get out of the sticky situation. Chapter 9 starts, and Ji-Yu knows that after the transformation, her enemy has heightened awareness at a maximum physical level, which makes him a yellow rank monster. Ji-Yu had no choice but to fight the monster without a master, despite being only an intern. Instead of being scared, she saw this as an opportunity because fighting a yellow rank monster is quite hard because of the headquarters regulations, and she did not want this chance to slip away. She activated her power again and rushed forward despite knowing the immense danger she was in. She takes advantage of her speed and creates a series of movements in different directions, showcasing her agility so that the monster will not be able to keep up with her. After seeing a slight opening, Ji-Yu was about to bite her nape, but a mouth in his back opened again, catching her arm and biting her arm. The monster immediately turned around and punched Ji-Yu, and blasted her far away, causing her to be smashed into a pole. The monster did not stop and immediately jumped to where she was and chomped her hand to hold her down, and he even smashed her to the ground, but to his surprise, Ji-Yu was quick enough to dodge, and that made the monster acknowledge her to be not just an ordinary intern. After fighting with the monster, Ji-Yu realized that the monster had absolute defense because of the mouths protecting his blind spots and also attacking her at the exact same time. This guy seems pretty invincible. Ji-Yu already knew the pattern of the monster and started to attack the monster once more. However, she does not want to show her skill, and she is planning to use it for the upcoming camp. But she has no choice but to use it now. But when she was about to unleash her true special move, her brother Dae Young butted in and offered Han Kang-ji, which he stabbed earlier, while they were both fighting to save him and his sister. Dae Young grabbed his sister's arms and ran away from the monster. He then explained that he made a deal with the monster that if he sacrificed Han, he would let his family go. His sister was shocked because of what he had done and asked him to let her go and kicked his feet, causing him to fall over. His sister yelled at him for the foolish decision he made because she knows as a hero that monsters never keep promises. She yelled at him and told him that being jobless is okay, but at least he won't give up on being a human. Dae Young was shocked by his sister's words, but then the monster immediately catches them and appears in the back of her sister while holding Han in the head. When his sister was about to turn away from the monster swung a punch that hit her in the face and blasted her away and even smashed her all the way to the wall. Dae Young told the monster about their deal, that he will not hurt his family if he offered Han, but the monster just laughed at him because he really believed his lies. Dae Young was terrified, so he ran away and shouted for help. The monster was pissed at him because he ruined this fun earlier while fighting his sister, so he threw a garbage can in his direction. That hit Dae Young and made him unable to run. The monster then spit facts to his face about him being a literal jobless bum and a disgrace to the society who trusts people's words so easily. Dae Young was upset, but he is still a loser and is powerless, so he can't do anything. The monster blames Dae Young for what happened to his sister, and Han telling him that it was his choice and killed them all. The monster expresses his gratitude and thanks for what he did, and bid him farewell. A sudden turn of events happened when Han regained his consciousness while being held by the monster by his head. He swung a punch at the monster's body, leaving a mark, and that helped him break free from the arms of the monster. The monster was really ticked off, and he immediately charged Han. But Han was confident and also rushes forward towards the monster. The two were about to clash, but the monster reaches him first, so Han could not do anything but to receive a direct hit from this big monster. After he was punched by the monster, a flashback was shown. It was when Han was visited by the Branch 1 director, Chun Yul. He asked him if he truly wanted to be a number 1 hero, but Han replied and emphasized that he will be a number 1 hero. He made the director smile with his answer and asked again that there are many people stronger than him and that they can take down a yellow rank monster with ease. And he asks, how will you surpass them? Han Kang-chi gave him a very beautiful answer, and he said, confidently, that a strong hero doesn't make him number 1. A truly number 1 hero is a hero who endures and never bends. The flashback ended and it got back to the present. After receiving a solid punch from the monster, he reached out his head and got a hold of the monster's fist so that he wouldn't fly away too far. He pulled himself towards the monster and used the momentum to swing a punch directed towards him, in his face. The monster was intimidated by Han's determination, but still, he was still able to move and block Han's punch. But Han Kang-chi immediately jumps again to reach the monster's face before the monster can react, and launch a right hook that lands on the monster's face. The monster was in disbelief how a weak-looking guy landed a blow to his face, and also why his defense named Judy was scared of Han and did not react. He realized that Han will be a great threat to Naruraka one day and planned to kill him while he is still not too strong. He raised his elbow to the air and attacked Han using his elbow, and it landed right to Han's face. Han felt the damage, but his strong will to defeat the monster prevailed, keeping his consciousness active amidst the damage he received. Han Kang-chi bit his elbow and pushed the monster's arms away to the ground. He got out of the monster's vision for a second and reappeared in front of the monster's face. Surprise! And he was about to swing another punch. But the monster was quick to react and literally unleashed his defense. Han failed to connect his punch and was sent flying by the monster to counter his attack. While he was defenseless, the monster jumped and slammed him to the ground once more. He unleashed a barrage of attacks, making Han unable to resist. But suddenly, Ji-yu arrived and kicked the monster to the face, but still it does not deal quite enough damage for the monster to pass out. And instead, the monster answered back with a knee kick that blasted Ji-yu 30 meters away. Dae Young gathered his courage while holding a broken piece of glass and yelled out at the monster to freeze. The monster looked back at Dae Young and cut his arms off instantly. Oh gosh. Unable for Dae Young to react, which made him cry in complete agony. The monster told him that a loser like him should know his place and will kill both of them, including his sister. In an unexpected turn of events, Ji-yu regains her consciousness and jumps towards the monster. The monster was about to turn around and deflect the attack of Ji-yu, but Dae Young got a hold of the monster's body as well, sacrificing himself, thus making the monster unable to turn towards Ji-yu. Dae Young thinks that he is really a useless mid-30s loser, but at least he won't die as one. Ji-yu grabs the monster's arm, unable for the monster to use it, and Han Kang-chi appears out of nowhere, back for battle, and charges forward to deal the finishing blow to the monster. His fist emits a beautiful and sparkling yellow and orange light, and he throws his punch at the monster's stomach, dealing significant damage. After their fierce battle against the yellow-ranked monster, the Branch 1 finally arrives. Kim Tani immediately checks the pulse of Dae Young, who was on the verge of death. Tani tries her best to keep Dae Young alive. The monster was still alive after receiving a very punishing blow from Han. He tried to get away from the scene while being injured from damage that he received from the battle. But then Yun Peng found him. The monster threatened Yun by planting a bomb on one of the houses with innocent people inside. and then the monster believed that he would rush towards the bomb to save the people, so he pressed the button. But to his surprise, Yunpeng did not move a single inch. Because Yunpeng is kind of crazy. I don't know if that's just me. Yunpeng just smiled like a psychopath and proceeded to cut the monster's arms in an instant. The monster, who was helpless, and asked him to stop, but Yun did not bother, and he cut off his legs and finally ended his misery by severing his head off. It was also revealed that Yun ordered Kim Ta-ni to safely evacuate the people inside the building before the explosion set off, making him one step ahead from his enemy. Kim Ta-ni reported that all injured people are being taken care of, and the intern of Branch 4 was taken by a division engineer. They were confused why the yellow craft card hadn't been activated. Kim Hwa-rang arrives at the scene and confronted Yun, who thinks Kim Hwa-rang was the reason behind it. But Yun denies it and says that he believed him because they are a team, and this made Hwa-rang kind of shocked and really pissed. The next day, Yun requested a secret investigation. Chun-yul was confused, so Yunpeng explains everything to him about yesterday's incident. He then explained also that there may be something that can ignore the effect of craft, who detects the uncontrollable matters. He also came to a conclusion that maybe a higher entity has emerged who is more powerful than a yellow-ranked monster. He also added that he wants a secret investigation because of the text written in the back of the picture he collected at yesterday's incident. The text was something that said Utopia. It led him to a conclusion that the Association of Humanity Utopia is connected to this incident. 3 years ago, Utopia was a small company, but it is now a top 2 company on the market after the Association of Humanity invested a large amount of money in them, and there is another place where the Association of Humanity invests, which is the Heroes. He thinks that it is too suspicious and can smell something fishy about it. Chun-yul pledges that he will keep this a secret and will do his best to help him. Chun-yul really is a kind, big man. The intern Han suddenly appeared after Kim Ta-ni guided him to the rooftop and told them about his recovering pace, which is better than the average person. Yun then suggests an idea to help Han Kang-chi grow. He suggests that he should attend the camp. Chun-yul thinks that it was a reckless idea because of the fact that he is still an intern for only 3 days. Yunpeng seems so invested in this idea and offers to personally train Han Kang-chi in a span of 1 month before the camp takes place. But Han Kang-chi was too innocent and thought of it as just a simple ordinary camp that normal people do, and he thought he was just going to be going out there and just eating some barbecue. Well, this really reminds me of Saitama and him being so strong that he becomes dumbfounded of whatever the other heroes are saying. A grade. Everything has a grade. The same goes for heroes. The treatment varies widely depending on your grade, and of course that range could be very wide. We then are introduced into a craft card. A craft card and its color determines the jobs that are assigned based on the grade. We see Master, which is yellow, orange, red, blue, green, and navy for full-time employee, and for a contracted intern, it was the beautiful purple. And then we see the Master. It's called the Octagon and is the top grade. And there is a large gap that really can't be crossed. We then see Chokun, or Ivan, which is near Dae Young, and this is a month ago. We see some guy on his phone, and he looks out the window, and he's complaining about there just being one antenna. He says he needs to get to the max level before he goes to the Green Dragon King on hard mode. He then looks out and is kind of pissed, and he says, "Where is a training center here?" Because he doesn't see anything. He's a 2nd Division intern, Seok-jin. He then looks to his side and calls out to somebody, and he hits him in the head very hardly. He says, "Are you dozing off even though you're nervous? Get a grip of yourself." And the nervous boy with glasses named Lee Soo-jeon just says, "Oh, okay, Seok-jin." We then see some type of ancient Chinese temple, and this is a hero's 3rd division, Seok G1. We then see a dude in a cloak, and he says a silent being that hides under our feet and oversees our life. That is Earth. There are a lot of people in cloaks, and then he says that they are the noble brothers who have continued the pride of this Earth. We then see them in a line, and they seem to all be wearing cloaks, which I find pretty suspicious. He then yells out, and he says, "Don't lose our pride to anyone, our loyal and noble brothers." And he's talking to the two kneeling down currently, and they have a mask on. We then see it is a 3rd Division intern, Myung Ho Seong, and the 3rd Division intern, Myung So Seong, and I'm guessing they're related. We then see that these two interns are joining the grade camp, and they'll be judged on their qualifications to become an employee. We then see the 4th Division intern, and they literally get chopped off by a helicopter, and it is On Ji-yu from previously, which is of course such a pretty cool thing to see. And we see some blind girl, and her name is of course Han Kyun-hee, and she seems to have a canine or a dog. On Ji-yu says, "Where's Master Kuptas this time?" And the girl with the dog just mentions that I'm sure he's already watching since they're in the mountain. And that camp is the HLC, or the Hero Leveling Camp. We then see someone in a car, and he says, "Excuse me," and the driver says, "Be quiet." And they are in traffic, and he says, "Shut it." And oh gosh, the traffic seems very severe. He says, "Why are you still alive? Why do you exist? Is your purpose in life is to make me suffer, you pest?" And he says sorry, but he gets told to shut up. We then see some sort of abandoned school, and it says it is the HLC, and the signs is literally just taped on. Some guy holding a card says, just like last year, there are 2 interns from each of the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th Division participating in the 5th camp, as he addresses his leader. His boss or leader, who is of course a girl named Yo-Anna, and is the Heroes Leveling Camp Operations Team Leader, she says, "I wonder who will become an employee this time," as she's looking at the screen. He says she's looking forward to this as she looks at the different options. We then see a robot, which I think is pretty weird. The guy holding the card says, "In the meantime, if a division lacks participants, the headquarters will be covering the lack in the number of participants." And then we see the robot, and they say that the headquarters will have Model T-17 participate if one is missing. This dude kind of looks like a cyberpunk or straight out of a Utopia movie. She says, "But where's the 1st Division participants?" And he says that they haven't arrived yet. She asks when they are going to come, and she's kind of sweaty because like last year, nobody attended to join the camp as well. She then says, "It's already been 20 minutes, so why can't they be here?" And then the guy says, "I don't know, ma'am," and she looks stressed. He asks if she has tried contacting them, and she has been, as we see the phone for the last 10 minutes. But of course, he isn't answering the phone, and she is talking about Yeonpung, the wind elf. And she is like, why can't they get their act together? She then mentions that are they going off the grid right away? And then she wonders what they are doing, as we see the wind elf, of course, yelling at our boy Han. The guy then says, "What should we do, team leader?" And she says, "I'm the idiot for trusting them." She then says, "We mustn't push them back." And that she says, "I can forgive a violation of the rules." He then says, "Understood." As she says, if they don't arrive starting 12, they'll be disqualified. And as we see the time, it is already 11:40. We then see they seem to be in some sort of abandoned school classroom, and there are 7 of them, including the robot. And the dog actually, so it's 8. We then see Seok-jin getting his back massaged by Soo-jun, and of course he says, "That's pretty good." He says, "You're pretty good at this. At least there's something you're good at." And Soo-jun, of course, just thanks him. He then says, "Are you all from the 4th Division? And why are all of you women?" And he says it's a disappointment. We then see them, and they don't even make a noise. And then he says, "Did you think you'd look a little strong if you wore military vests? But you get 40 points. And then he looks at something and he says, "Well, I'll give you 80. And of course, our boy is just a pervert. We then see the 3rd Division guys are a sight to behold. He wonders if they came from some sort of part-time folk village. And then, of course, he gives them 20 points. And then he looks at the robot. And then he says, "What's that, AlphaGo? Are you here to play Go?" And then the robot just says, "How are you?" He then laughs and shouts, saying, "They call this a hero camp? Children's house play is more intense than this." And our boy's tongue literally comes out. And he gives it 10 points for the camp. But I know this cocky dude is going to get put in his place. On then says, "Hey, yellow pig." and then she wonders if he's gonna shut up. He then says, sorry if I knowed you, but I'm just saying, even though you're mad, you still look hecka cute, and he gives a very weird look. She still calls him, look at this pig crap face, you got a death wish, huh? And then the person beside her just says, fighting inside the camp will result in immediate disqualification of the people involved. Have you already forgotten that, Junior? She then mentions it is strategy to make you lose your composure. And of course, she just says, I knew that too. And then of course, her teammate just says, an opportunity will present itself, so hold it in a bit longer. And then Seok-jin just gives a heart with his fingers. He then looks back at Sojun and then he says, why did you stop? If you didn't want to do it, you should have said something from the start, and you're embarrassing me. This guy is super menacing. He then puts him to his side and puts his arms around him and starts to laugh, saying, look at your face. That's so hilarious. There's no need to fear between us, don't you agree? And then we see An and her teammate, and they know that this isn't right. He then says, do you agree? And then Seo-jun just has to say, yeah, thanks. And then Seok-jin just says, in this 10-point camp, there's nothing that can stop me. And the only thing to worry about is that guy as he looks at the empty chair. We then see the heroes from the 3rd division. They say, that's vacancy is from the 1st division, is it not? And then the one beside him says, yes, there's no mistaking it. The 1st division is participating in the camp this time. And Kyun-hee says they still haven't arrived, so they must be quite relaxed. We are then explained too that the 1st and 2nd gate are considered to be the strongest among the 8 signs, and they are protected by the 1st division. Fire and wind. The reason behind it, nobody knows exactly, but rumors say that they don't pick anybody who wasn't as strong as they were themselves. And then they say, as we look at somebody here on fire, that means that the 1st intern, this time, is an insanely skilled person, which I know we can all agree with. Of course, Seok-jin just says, in this 10-point camp, he's the only one I'm looking forward to. And then he wonders, how many points is he gonna get as he lets out his tongue again? What the heck? The door suddenly opens, and everybody looks at it. And then Seok-jin is like, he's finally here. We then see some big buff guy with red eyes, and he is from the 1st division. And he looks very menacing with purple aura around him and lightning. Seok-jin says, you're above my expectations, you get 90 points. And then we see him right here. And then he points towards our boy Han Kang-chi. And he is like, you're Mr. Han Kang-chi, the intern from 1st division, right? And he says, yes, correct. And of course, the 2nd division is literally left speechless, and all the other divisions as well. And Seok-jin is so confused he even has a spider to his right. Han Kang-chi has his backpack on, and he's like, huh? And then he says, hello, and the chapter comes to an end. We're introduced to Baek-sa-rin, the HLC training officer in charge of their first quest, and she says, nice to meet you all. Dang, bro, she got a pretty cool leg tattoo. She then says, after a long time of doing this, I'm capable of detecting something, and that is your mental states. She then says it seems that this time's participants are very nervous, and it looks like all of their souls have left their bodies. She then comes to Seok-jin and she says, especially this yellow boulder. He's so nervous that he doesn't look his size and his face is so yellow. He then yells out really quickly and loudly. And of course, she yells out as well, this dude really is just a goofball. And then he points towards, of course, our boy, Han Kang-chi, and he's like, how is a guy like him the 1st division intern? And no matter how hard I look at him, it doesn't make sense. He is like, me? And then of course, he tells Seok-jin, you gave me 90 points. And then Seok-jin says, it was a mistake and I'm not apologizing. The people from the 3rd division then say, of course, the only intern in the 1st division is an ordinary high school student, so that is surprising. And the one in the red mask says, I really don't understand it either. Kyun-hee then says there must be a reason behind it. If not, then what's the reason? And An, of course, is just there, nervous because she ran into him before. Seok-jin then explains, you get negative 90. No, negative 9,000 points. And An Ji-yu is like, as expected, this guy is a 1st division intern. Of course, Kyun-hee is like, hey, why, Hubei? Do you perhaps know him? And she says no. But then she says, let's not get involved with him until the end because he's a competitor. And Baek-sa-rin just says, alright, attention, the first quest is going to start. But Seokjin is still yelling, and he gives a negative 100,000 and negative 1,000 trillion score to our boy Han Kang-chi. Bayron then jumps on top of him, and she says silence because our boy just kept on yapping and talking so much. And of course, she easily pushes him to the ground. The other contestants are like, what the heck, I didn't even see her. And she puts up her glasses and she says, acts of defiance will not be tolerated in the camp. And then we see her, and she seems to be very menacing, and I guess her animal that represents her is a cobra. She then shows up her phone and she says the first quest is a team match, and this will strengthen the bond between you all. We see the tiger team, which is consisted of the blue masked dude, Ji-yu, and Han Kang-chi. And then she says, dang it, I don't want to get involved with you, but this is an undisputably perfect ladder climbing site. And then Han Kang-chi is like, don't you have anything to say to me? And she gets a flashback to what happens. And she says, if you want me to apologize to you, wake up. I don't have any remorse. And then she starts to say, it's useless to be hot-headed. That's my way of the hero. But then she gets ignored, and Han Kang-chi goes over to the blue masked dude and he says, you have something to tell me, right? And he's like, pardon. And then he says, you know me, right? And of course, our girl is just left there alone. She then yells out and goes towards him, and she is like, hey, are you joking right now? And then Han Kang-chi says, no, who are you? And our girl An Ji-yu is pretty pissed. We see the wolf team, and it is Kyun-hee with the red masked person as well as the wolf. And we see the lion team. It is the robot, Seokjin, and Sojun. And then Seokjin says, I will kill any of you if you hinder me. And then he says, understood? And both of them say yes. And then, of course, Ji-yu is like, I will say it again, I don't have any remorse for you, so don't expect anything. And then Han Kang-chi just says, okay. And then he goes back and forth with, of course, the person with a blue mask. And Ji-yu seems to be literally just talking to herself, like what the heck is going on here. We then see her punch him in the background while the red masked person says, so what is the first quest? And Baek Seirin says it is a raid speedrun as a bunch of doors fall down behind her. A raid. It is a journey in which multiple heroes defeat mobs on a specific map and target the final boss mob. We then find out that Tiger, Lion, Wolf go through door 1, 2, and 3 and target the map that each team has decided on. And the team that defeats the last yellow mob boss wins. She also mentions that the winner out of the 3 will receive a benefit for the next quest, and the last place will be automatically eliminated, and she gives a very creepy and eerie look here. Seokjin then says, everybody follow me slowly. He then runs quick, and then he says confidently, I will take the first place, as we see the robot behind him and Sojun riding his water wave. We then see different monsters, and then we see a system that says, how many volts would you like to shoot? He says 1,000, and boom, they are incinerated. Ji-yu is like, that electricity pig barrel wasn't just running his mouth, huh? And let's go. And then she says to Han Kang-chi, tell me if you're tired, I'll lower the pace. And we see him, and he actually is tired, and we find out that he sucks at sports. And she is like, you said you're tired so fast. And then he says, my backpack is heavy, you know. And of course, Ji-yu is like, what should we do if you're already getting tired from here? And the guy with the mask just says, please come down. The start of the first quest raid. Baek Seirin wonders who's going to be first place. We then get a call, and it is from the wolf team. And of course, Kyun-hee says, we've completed the quest. And we see the wolf on top of the beheaded monster. And they finished it in literally just 10 minutes. Baek Seirin is like, how the heck did they finish it in 10 minutes? And even for an employee, no, that's even impossible for her herself. She then wonders because it is so impressive. Kyun-hee then asks, hey, do you want to go out for lunch or something? And then she wonders if they are geniuses. We then find out that the wolf team defeated the final boss and completed the first round in first place. So the remaining teams are the tiger and the lion team. We then go back to Seokjin and Sojun and the robot, and then he seems pretty pissed. He has electricity on his hands, and he says, I lost my first place to people who aren't even 50 points. And he says, it's a disgrace. He then looks back at Sojun, and then he says, I told you not to be eyesores. Do you really want to die? They then jump towards something huge, and it is some sort of stone giant. He then says that negative 900 points crappy team. There's no way they'll be faster than me, as he calls out the deer head or the stone giant. And he says, I wonder how many points you are. We then go back inside the ancient ruin that, of course, our tiger team is in as they look around. The guy with the blue mask says Nudem is indeed amazing, and she is like, how the heck did they already finish? He then looks back and says, why don't we leave the intern from the first division here, and just the two of us go? And if we stay like this, they won't be able to defeat the boss mob. They wonder what they're going to do, but of course we see him on the back of the guy wearing the blue mask, and he asks, of course, GU, why are we taking us with him? She says the final boss is a yellow grade and it won't be easy for them to defeat it. And she mentions how he is quite strong. He then asks her, how do you know I'm strong? Our boy really has bad memory. She says this is literally a speedrun where they need to defeat the final boss as quickly as they can, and an extra set of helping hands will do the trick. The guy with the blue mask then says that intern from the 4th division is strange. And she says, yeah, I felt that too. And then they wonder why they haven't seen a single normal mob. We then go back to the leader, and she says, incredible. They beat the raid quest in just 10 minutes. And she says the previous record was 30 minutes from the 4th division, and this is the first time since HLC was founded. She then smiles and says, this time's camp is much more fun than I thought. And she talks to her assistant, and she says, did you hear the news? There's a new record for the first quest. And the guy says, rather than that, we need to rush you to the control room. A problem has appeared with the first quest. We then go back to the tiger team, and there is a huge, giant-looking dude, and I don't know what he's doing, but it seems he's eating, and we see a bunch of skeletons in front of him. He literally looks like Bane, and then he says, I am hungry. Hungry. And our boy literally looks like he's straight out of a Ben 10 movie too. He says disgusting. They're all disgusting. And our boy really has an interesting build, and he sort of looks like Abomination, which is the enemy of Hulk, along with a mix of the Joker or something. He then screeches, and then he says, do you have something tasty? Because he literally just got one-shotted by this Titan-looking dude that came up from behind him that looked like the Warhammer Titan. I didn't expect that to happen. It has one eye, and then he asks, are you tasty? What a pretty creepy person. The chapter starts, and we see the Titan-looking thing ask if they taste good. And the guy with the blue mask jumps up and punches it along with GU. He then literally just blocks the attack. The blue masked person throws at him. GU attacks him as well. But then he lets out a punch and is about to hit GU, but he barely misses it. And that is because our boy Han Kang-chi gave it a punch in the face. And he is like, aw man. And he gets uppercutted to the torso. We then are in some sort of room and we find out that the body number 1 has escaped. And the assistant says, what should we do? Should we stop the test? And then Baek-se-rin says, are you crazy? We can't do that. And then he says to her, they are classified as orange and the highest ranked yellow. And it's a problem of equity. He then says, we'll just call it compatibility, can't we? We then go back to the Stone Mountain Giant. And of course, it is punching everyone in sight. We get a system notification from Seokjin, and it says, how many volts would you like to use? And he says 10,000 volts. System charging. And he uses the 10,000 volts, and it shocks this huge giant. He then mentions, you do have a point. Team Lion's stereotypes are water and electricity, and boss number 2's type is grass. And it's the opposite of their types. And then he's just standing there, unfazed by the amount of volts. Baek-se-rin then says, what kind of high school students are taking the college entrance exam? What do they do if there's no equity, huh? And then he says, but... And then his boss just says, that makes sense. The goal of this camp is to find the best employee among the participants, their compatibility and grades. We then see Kyun-hee and she says, eat a lot, Jack. And Jack is the name of her canine or her wolf. And then the blue-haired girl says, number 1's type is normal. Even though it's high grade, everyone's type on Team Tiger is fighting. So isn't it more effective for them? We then go back to the Titan and it lets out a punch. And then it asks for some time to strategize. And then it just says, okay, what a wholesome moment. And the Titan goes back to sitting on, of course, the mountain of skeletons. They suddenly have to have glasses now, and they have notebooks, and they start to discuss their game plan. and the blue-haired girl says they could have a chance to win against Team Lion. And then Baxarian is like, join forces? And then she says, I don't think that that's possible. And we go back to them, and they just literally all jump at the same time, and it seems that they gave up on fighting a strategy to attack this huge-looking titan. Dang it, I guess teamwork doesn't always work, but maybe it'll work this time. We then see the blue masked dude punch at the titan, but it dodges it. But of course, Ji-Yu punches it successfully. Han Kang-chi is about to punch it, but he punches both of them off with ease. He then punches the blue masked dude, and he says, I can't do anything. And he says, apologies, master. I don't have the power. He then flexes his muscles, and our boy has become jacked, and his cloak is removed. He then punches towards a titan, and the titan mentions how it hurts, and then it opens its mouth, and he says, I want to eat you. Nom 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 nom. He really just consumed our boy, the blue masked dude. He says it tastes like a strawberry, and then he asks Ji-Yu and of course Kang-chi if they taste good. We go back to Seok-jin, and he says, Soo-jun, get it. And we see Soo-jun literally on the monster, and he surrounds himself with a bubble, and the entire giant is now surrounded in a bubble or in water. And that is a special move, water jail. He then starts to drink the water. Our boy must have been thirsty. And then he literally restored 10% of his HP. And of course, Seok-jin just hits him and berates him again. He then says, Seo-jun, I thought of a good idea, as he hugs him. And then we see a dog. And then Han Kang-chi is like, can I ask you a question? And of course, it is Ji-Yu who is carrying him in her dog form. And she just tells him to shut up. It is a shape-shifting stage 1 model, dog spirit. We then see the titan chasing after them, and it is about to literally slam on them. But of course, it just switches like the ordinary cliffhanger. We then see the robot, and it uses a middle punch, and he punches the giant. We see Seo-jun, and he uses water jail again, and as it starts to drink, he says, Seo-jun, don't stop moving. And then he thinks in his head, Seok-jin is believing in me. I don't want to disappoint him any further. And he says he can do this. We then see excessive hydration. Its entire body is filled with water. And then we see a system notification. How many volts would you like to use? And Seok-jin is behind Seo-jun, and he says 100,000 volts. System charging. Our boy is about to kill Seo-jun just to kill this monster. Boom. He uses it on the monster, and it literally explodes. He says, how do you like that, you dear crap? And then we see Seo-jun literally burnt to a crisp, and I think his arm fell off. Round 1 is over, and the team that advances to round 2 is Team Tiger. And Seok-jin is pretty pissed off. We switch back, and then we see the blue-haired guy, and then he says, what about that, you piece of crap? And our boy literally looks like a ripped Gojo with a mix of Inosuke from Demon Slayer. And this dude literally just killed this monster from within, but he seems to have some sort of talisman surrounded on his body. We then see, he says to himself, it is helpless. I can feel the dark solitude inside. Is this the abyss? And of course, this is Myung-ho-seong, the blue mask guy, talking. He then smiles and gives a menacing grin. And he says, blood? We then go back to the titan who has become literally huge, and he smashes down at Han Kang-chi and of course Ji-Yu. We then see his mouth and hands come out of it. Boom. It gets ripped apart, and a big Giga Chad freaking huge bodybuilder guy comes out. And it is of course Myung-ho-seong. He then gives a menacing smile like the statue in Solo Leveling. Shout out to you guys who know that. And then, literally, Kang-chi and Ji-Yu are shocked by this. He then uses Goblin Punch, second secret form, and his head turns blue. And then he smashes the Titan into pieces. He picks up his mask, and he says a Goblin Punch is a fighting style that has been used by goblins since ancient times. And he explains that he's a 28th generation descendant of that family. He also explains as he puts on his cloak and his mask on that he couldn't control himself when he smelled your healthy blood because of his lack of skills, and so he apologizes. And Ji-Yu is just like, you're forgiven. And then she asks him, why do goblins like the smell of blood? He says, why? And then Ji-yu says, shouldn't it be the opposite? He then says, no. And then she asks, what your favorite food is? He says, red bean stew. And then, of course, this isn't adding up. She then says to herself that she's heard about the third division from her master, and there are people who can use the spirit of some local beings, and their potential is beyond their imagination. Of course, Kang-chi just says, when did you pull out the sword from your chest? And then Ho-seong is just like, that's not right. And then we switch back and we see the workers, and we find out that the first test is over. Each contestant will have a personal maintenance time and then gather at the training room in an hour. And then we go to the restroom, and we see Seok-jin, and he says to himself, I did something wrong. My heart was so weak I attacked my team member. This wouldn't have happened if I hadn't picked that unhelpful guy. I'm sorry. He then yells to himself, I can do it. If you believe in me one more time, I will get gold next year. I promise. And then we hear, understood. I'll give you one last chance. And then the door opens. And then we see the Seok-jin sees time at the camp is not over yet. We then see some little cute and kind of scary cat thing. And then he says, ta-da, all done. And we are looking at Ji-yu, and it seems that her leg has already been treated. I thought this dude was an evil person for a second. He then says it wasn't a deep wound, so I could heal it quickly, meow. And it is really a cat. We then see the different cats, and he explains, among spirits, us Optimists have been supporting heroes from the beginning until now. And there's nothing to do in this era of peace, so we are here to make a living, and meow. This is pretty cool, and it seems like they were in their own world when there was war. Ji-yu says, a spirit, I've only heard of them, and it's her first time seeing one. And then the cat then says, you're so pretty, Hero Nim, as pretty as Yoon-hee. And then she's like, why are you saying such crap all of a sudden? And then they all look at her, and they're all blushing, and they say she's really pretty, and she just tells them to get lost. And then he then calls on to some JoJo-looking dude, which looks really out of place. And he says, Fi, this is Yoon-hee. And then, of course, she is like, we don't even look the same at all. And then he gives a menacing look and he folds his arms. And then she is like, just stop it. And then she knocks them all out as she leaves except for the cat that healed her. And then the cat says, come again, pretty lady. She mentions that she only got some scrapes, but if it hadn't been for the goblin, she could have even died. And she gets a flashback here. And that tighter-looking thing really is scaring. We then see her as a baby and she's crawling. And we see her in ruin. She says she has to become stronger. And we see a hero in front of her. And then she mentions to become somebody who can stand next to that person honorably. We then see Kang-chi. And she is like, what the heck? Why are you doing here? He says he was worried and he has a band-aid on his nose. She smiles and she says, because you couldn't do anything at the first test? And then she says, good, because I have something to tell you. I take back that you're strong and you're weak, so give up already. And she says you don't deserve to become a hero. And this honestly seems pretty mean just to say to him. We then see Sojun and he says hello. He says, you are? And then he introduces himself as Lee Soo-jun from the 2nd Division and that he is here to get treatment because he also got injured. But I think injured is an understatement because our boy literally got incinerated. He then says everyone thinks it's because of Seok-jin, but just because he speaks so rudely, he isn't the bad guy. Are you kidding me, dude? This guy literally tried to electrocute you alive. He says that among the 12th generation of second-degree interns, he was the best, and we see him holding the sign. He then points towards Sojun, and he says that, of course, Sojun was picked by him. He then says nervously, if it wasn't because of Seok-jin, I wouldn't deserve to be here. And she just spits like, tsk. And then she says, I think I get why that yellow pig chose you. He brainwashed you really well. And she is right. He then bows down and he says, please do your best, in my place as well. And then Kang-chi is like, lies, as he crouches down. He says, I knew it. And Sojun is confused. He says that nobody that can try has a right to give up. And of course, our girl Ji-yu just cringes at this. She then walks away and Kang-chi chases after him. And Sojun is left thinking that you would be satisfied with me, right? Is that theme for me? But what are my real feelings as he looks at his fist? And we are outside and we are talking to the Lion team. Baek Seirin says that the team that proceed to the round 2 are Team Wolf, who came in first place, and Team Tiger, and Team Lion is eliminated. We then see Sojun reflecting and he says he's so angry. He's so mad at himself for not being able to participate at the camp with his own power. He then starts to cry, and our boy might even have a Saitama story. He says that he really can't hold it in. And then, of course, Seokjin puts his hand on his shoulder, and he says, "You did everything you did, Sojun." And then he smiles and he says, "That's what's important, right? We hear attention." And Baek Se-rin says, "Team Tiger with a time of 3:27.06 and Team Lion with a time of 3:27.10. Your team sadly didn't make it, huh?" And then she says, "But our camp decided to give you a rare chance to qualify for staying here." But just at that moment, Seokjin uses an electricity punch and grabs Sojun like a ragdoll, and he punches him, and we see the lightning, and everybody around them are literally shocked. Even, of course, the instructor, Baek Se-rin. He then says, as there's blood on his hands, one member of the team will be saved through a consolation match, and the game will be decided by the team. One is eliminated, and the other one passes automatically. And then he gives a menacing smile, and he's like, "So the one passing is me, right?" This guy has gone crazy. Baek Se-rin just stands there, and she says, "The winner is Seokjin from the 2nd division. He then smiles, and he says, "There's no way I would get thrown out." And we see the broken glasses in front of him. We see Ji-yu and, of course, Kyun-hee, and she says, "This disgusting piece of trash really just did that." And, of course, Kyun-hee just says, "Just hold it in, and that you shouldn't cause any problems." She says, "I know." But then just at that moment, we see Kang-chi stand in front of Seokjin. And then Seokjin asks, "Do you have something to say to me? 900, negative 900 points?" And Kang-chi seems to have gotten absolutely furious. Baek Se-rin then says, "The second test is PvP, and so it's a 1v1 fight, and I think I know what our boy Kang-chi is planning." Ji-yu is like, "Wait, what is he doing? Out for doing something forbidden?" He then loads up a punch, and we see the blue aura light from his eyes. And then he's about to punch Seokjin. And then Seokjin says, "I didn't know it was that simple. So simple, it's ridiculous." He says to go home, but he sees a fist in front of him, and it is literally a cyberpunk X Saitama death symbol. And I think that this guy should be scared. He is so scared, and he throws up a punch as well. But Ji-yu pushes him off, and then she says, "You fat guy, do you want to be kicked out?" He says, "How dare you? You dare get in my way. Do you want to die too?" And Baek Se-rin says, "Stop." And she says, "If you act like this, I'll kick you right at this instant. So go to your places." And they back off. We then hear all contestants moving to round 2 have been confirmed, and round 2 will begin in 10 minutes. We then see Ji-yu and the wolf, and then she says, "I'm sorry." And Kyun-hee and the wolf says, "I didn't even say anything though." And she says, "You did, by a lot, and I guess it's just instinct or telekinesis." Ji-yu says, "I was wrong to jump in, but that yellow pig was serious. That spiky hair guy would have definitely gotten very hurt, or even died." Kyun-hee then asks, "Why is that bad?" And then she just says, "If you have some affection for him because you were on the same team, get rid of it now, because that will be your weakness." And she opens her eyes, and I didn't know she had vision. She says, "Don't forget, everyone is a competitor now." And then Ji-yu just says, "I know about that, so don't worry." And they stand there, unwavering and unfazed, like a brick wall, and she asks, "What will you do now, Junior?" And then she is like, "I guess destiny didn't like what you did." We then see Kang-chi facing off with Seokjin, and we hear that the first match of round 2 will begin, and then it will start now. Seokjin says he's excited, and he shows all of his teeth, and Kang-chi just stands there. Some kid starts to yawn, and he is like, "I'm so flippin' bored," and this round is PvP, and we see a big bear which he is laying down on. His name is Young Ho-yi, and he seems to be a training teacher in the hero leveling camp. That's pretty crazy that he's just a kid. Kang-chi asks, "What's PvP?" And the kid is like, "You don't even know what PvP is, are you dumb?" And even the bear is like, "Get lost, dude." He explains that unlike traditional PvP, there's one more special rule, and that's reward PvP. We then find out that he can use a weapon, skills, or anything, and the competition is over when the other opponent becomes incapacitated or withdraws. But if you win, you can take the opponent's stats as a reward. And honestly, guys, I don't know if you see this, but this guy's holding a really cool longsword, and the girl looks like a fighter in the Cyberpunk X Street Fighter collab if there ever was one. And then he says that the size of the stats can be adjusted. He then puts his head on his cheeks, and this guy's pretty cute, but we know that he is dangerous because he's a teacher here. He says, "You guys, how much are you wagering?" Seokjin says, "Well, you have to be generous, so I'll donate all of my stats," and he'll bet all the stats he's built up so far. He then licks his lips. Guys, this guy's a little suspicious. And he says, "You're not good enough compared to my stats, so take out some of your money." He then says, "I agree, the real world stats is money. So what will you do first division?" Kangchi then says, "Okay, but I won't take the reward." He says, "I want to give all the stats to Soo-jun, C from the 3rd division. Seokjin laughs and he's like, "Ha ha ha, that's so cringy, dude. Are you the protagonist of a B-grade action manhwa?" Wait, I'm pretty sure he is, but let's go back to the story. He says, "I don't want to." And then Kangchi says, "Getting the stats means that at the end you'll come back to me." And that's kind of revolting. And then Seokjin says, "All right, I agree." And then the little kid says, "Really?" And of course the bear just says, "Get lost." So we're going to call him the Get Lost Bear. Seokjin then takes off his suit, and then he says, "I'm sick of talking to that spiky hair kid now." And then we see our boy thinks he's Nikola Tesla, and we see all the gadgets that he brings out, and I guess he's like Dr. Octopus from Spider-Man. System notification. You are using 100% of the suit's power. Anyways, we then see him, and he seems to have a literal huge suit on him, and he's using the full armor suit. He then licks his lips, guys. This is like the 1,000th time he has literally licked his lips. And he says, "I'll chop you up quickly with my full power." The person in the red mask, Myung Soseong, says, "Yes, it is a brain technique," because her blue masked acquaintance was really confused as well. He explains that the 3rd Division Brain is a group of heroes with advanced technology called Volt Light, and that technology is considered to be beyond the capabilities of existing heroes. And we see the literal light from his heart, or should I say the arc reactor, because our boy thinks he's really Iron Man at this point. But I think this guy will definitely give Iron Man a run for his money. She then says, "What do you think, Hoseong? Does the 1st Division guy stand a chance?" He says, "Let's get ready for the next match," and they think he's going to lose. Ji-yu says he already came out at full power, and she can feel an incredibly strong energy. She wonders what Kangchi will do, and he just stands there, not making a move. Seokjin then says, "Whoa, I can feel it! The incredible power that can't be stopped by anyone." And then he shows his tongue again, and he says, "You're already dead." But Kyun-hee says it's strange. Why is he already using all of his power? And then he begins to sweat. And then he says that feeling. And we get a flashback towards that big fist from earlier. And he says if he did feel wrongly, if it was an illusion. And yes, it says here that that was death. And then he says to himself, "I was just overthinking it. And there is nobody who can beat this full armor suit. And that is the essence of science." And then we see Kangchi standing there, and his red aura from fire and his red eyes are really intimidating our boy in this Iron Man suit. He says, "I'll definitely defeat you in one shot." And then we see Yang Ho-yi, the kid with the bear, says, "Get ready," and the bear is following his moves. Start. We then see he uses one of his arms quickly, and a yellow orb of such starts to spin. It is about to attack Kangchi, but then, boom, it hits, and we see all the lightning spurts out in different directions. Of course, Ji-yu is like, "He's really strong," and she says that it's too overwhelming. And then he says it's a pity to think if he'd mess up this time, I would have killed him. And oh gosh, it is the one and only Yeonpung, the Wind Elf, the captain of Division 1. He smiles and he says, "It looks like you've come to your senses now." We then go back to Seokjin, and his arm is perfectly fine. But then, his arm is instantly shattered to a pulp. He is so confused how this just happened. Kangchi then punches him in his stomach, and we see Seokjin in a lot of pain. We then see Kid. Kangchi says, "Yes, sir." And of course, it was a successful punch. All of a sudden, we see some cute kawaii neko girl, and she says, "Laha, I'm MC Luna, the host of the world's biggest event, Hero vs. Robot." He then says, "Hello, Mr. Thunderbolt Man." And we see some guy, and I thought this was Flash for a second, but it seems like it's Flash with a cape. He says, "Ha ha ha, hello." She says there are predictions that Robot T4 will be no joke, so what do you think? He then points and he says, with the advancement of science, one day robots might be protecting our society, but it's not today, as he laughs. We then see Seok-jin from the past, I guess, and he's literally eating chips and coke, and he's still fat. He says he's so cool, as expected of my idol Thunderbolt Man. And then he says Thunderbolt Man is overflowing with confidence today. We can't wait to see what fancy techniques you'll show us at this event. And the event begins. Seok-jin's face, that was previously so happy, begins to turn into a shocked one. He got beaten to a pulp, and then it hasn't even been long since a round started, and the hero Thunderbolt Man has been defeated by T4. That is pretty sad, and I really like Thunderbolt Man. Of course, Seok-jin is like, what? You've got to be kidding me. And her boy is left speechless. We then go back to the real time, and Seok-jin is literally mid-air, and he is like, advanced science dominates this era, and that advanced science essence is me, Seok-jin. And then he wonders why he can't lose to the negative 900. He calls up the system, and then it asks, how many volts would you like to use? He says, shut up and give me max power. System charging. We see a literal cool looking Thunder Dragon, guys. This is such a cool panel. This literally looks like Rayquaza from Pokemon, and of course, something probably from Jujutsu Kaisen or something. He then uses it and punches Kang-chi, and he says, go to hell! Of course, the Wind Elf, Yeonpung, is just like, the second division suit is pretty good. But so what, pig? And Kang-chi punches his stomach so badly it literally becomes a laundry machine, and it starts to twist. He then gets launched back so far, and he collapses on the ground. We see Kang-chi, and he has a suit on with electricity on it. And he says, you're not the only one with a suit. We then see Thunderbolt Man, and he says, I'm the sublime hero who protects the peace and love of the world, Thunderbolt Man. And he gives his little stats. Well, his nickname is a Raikiri Knight, and he is the second out of 8 heroes in the second division. He then says, have you been well? It's been a real long time since we last met, so I'm excited. And he's talking to Yeonpung. He then gives his flashy pose with sparklings coming out of him, and he says hero pose. He says, it's been a while, shall I greet you in my hero pose? And of course, Yeonpung is just like, why did you come to lose to a robot? He then laughs like a real hero, and he says there's no rule that a robot can become a master, so I'm still doing it, and nobody knew that I would lose. And then, he then goes down to the ground, and he ponders saying, nobody in the second division listens to me, even Bobby. And Bobby is his pet dog. This dude really done messed up, and I think he needs to upgrade his, well, powers. He then says anyways, the first division intern is really amazing, and he can't believe that a person who joined the company less than a month ago can have such incredible power. And then Yeonpung is like, you're one to say that. He then says, what did you do to that boy for an entire month? And then we see Kang-chi, and his literal shirt from school is shattered and burnt. And then Yeonpung then starts to laugh like, tee 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 tee. He says, well, to put it into words, he says anger control. And our boy looks very creepy in this panel. We then see him, and he has literally turned into Momo. And we see him punching Kang-chi, and he goes up to him again, peekaboo, and he keeps punching. He smiles and says, this hurts a lot. You're handling it quite well, huh? And then he says, I guess you're not just anybody's son. He then mentions as Kang-chi is in pain, your life is more like that of a cockroach, disgusting and dirty. He then smiles again, and he says, your mother, didn't she run away because she hated that? And Kang-chi gets furious, and he gives a look of utter brutality. He tries to punch, of course, Yeon, and then he catches it, and he says, anger, that's your trigger for you to do this punch. And this is, of course, Yeonpung's strategy to get him to punch this hard. He says to get used to this feeling. And we go back to Seok-jin, and his belly still has a literal crater in it from Kang-chi's punch. And then after that, Seok-jin is like, how is that possible? The power of science is great. Kang-chi says, you're right, you are strong. But today I'm stronger, and he uses a max upper, which is a really strong uppercut. He falls to the ground, and then we see Yang Ho-yi and the bear, and they declare that Seok-jin from the second division can no longer continue, so of course our boy, Kang-chi, took the victory. We then see the red hair person in the mask, Soseom, And she says, how did that happen? Didn't you say he was weak? And then, of course, Ho-seong is like, yes, I'm incredibly flustered. And Kyun-hee says, with her dog also sweating now, that's a big shocker. I can't believe he's that strong. And she says, well, there's somebody else who's even more shocked. And then we see Ji-yu, and her jaw has literally dropped to the floor. And then she gets a flashback to when she said, you're weak. You don't deserve to be a hero. And she has messed up. And then she gets a false image of him smiling. And she is like, that dude, how dare he fool me? She then jumps up in her dog stance straight up like a dog. And of course, Kyun-hee is like, what are you doing? We then see Yeon-pyung is like, what? Because Thunderbolt Man is like, our second division's ace just lost? She is then trying to get towards Kang-chi, and she's like, oi, come here, dude. And of course, Ho-yi or Yang Ho-yi says, what are you doing? It's not your turn yet. Because the bear says, get lost again. We then see Kang-chi walking, and his uniform is completely shattered. And she looks at him as he's walking away, and it resembles that person that saved her back when she was only a child. And then Kang-chi looks back, and he runs towards her. And then he is like, what is it? Were you worried about me? She then says, why did you pretend to be weak before? And he says, wait, really? Awkward silence, guys. And then she uppercuts him out of nowhere, and the bear just says, get lost. I think this is the only thing the bear can say. We then see Yeon-pyung, and he says that rookie is pretty good. And then we see the Raikiri Knight, or Thunderbolt Man, and he is crying because their division is out now. Yeon-pyung says, I don't know what you've been doing these past days, but watching you was disgusting. And then we see the director with blue hair, and she says, follow me for a second. An urgent problem has appeared. Thunderbolt Man is like, an urgent problem? What is it? We then see on the news, and there seems to be some dude with horns and another human, and they seem to have signed some sort of treaty. He then says, so we're able to go to Nararuka now? And then the office worker or the construction worker says, to be honest, I'd like to go there once. And then his worker says, you can't do that when you work here, boss. And then he says, what? This is just work. And then the other guy says, yeah, I'm curious too. We then see the assistant of the blue-haired lady holding the card, and he says the first round is over. And the workers go towards the site to clean it, and they say, I hope the walls aren't too damaged. But just at that moment, the employee's head starts to transfigurate, and then they look back, and then he just says, yes. And then the construction worker says, nothing, I'm just a little tired. And the employee says, just hang in there a little longer. And it seems like this guy is an imposter, but not in Among Us. Yang Ho-yi, the kid of the bear, says, round 2, Han Chun-hee from the 4th Division versus Myung Ho-seong from the 3rd Division. What do you want to bet on? And then he says, for your information, Kyun-hee, you can use your benefit from the last test. And then Ho-seong says, I'll bet half of my stats. And then Kyun-hee says, I'll do so too. And that she will save her benefit, and her dog is ready. Of course, So-seong, the one in the red mask, says from the sidelines, that woman is strong, and she uses overwhelming ki to force her opponent into becoming her prey. Begin. The match starts, and Ho-seong, the blue mask guy, literally rips off, he flexes off his muscles so hard, the cloak falls off. He then says, and he remembers, that don't get pushed back by the first wave. If you do, you won't be able to reach her. Kyun-hee says, I see you've heard about my power. And she sweats like, that's why I didn't like the first test. He goes on to punch her. Boom. It seems that she went right behind him. And she says that you're not the only one who's heard something about her opponent. Her eyes suddenly turn red as she opens them, and she says, Ho-seong, do you perhaps like mountains? And we see Ho-seong in his stance, with some ropes on his forearms, and he says mountains, and it seems they have spawned into a mountain. He wonders if it's an hallucination, and she says be careful, because hiking at night can be very dangerous. And we see a bunch of red eyes right in front of him, and gosh, this is such an OP ability. Boom! We see some snakes about to bite Ho-seong, but he unleashes his aura and slams his foot on the ground. And he also says if this place really is a mountain, then it is familiar to him as well. He launches a barrage of punches, and it seems he took them down. Kyun-hee is right behind him, and she says, do you know that the basis of awe is that humans feel when they stand in front of a mountain? He then jumps up and looks behind him instantly and punches her easily. We then see her face get splattered and she is on the ground. But it is not her. It is Soseong. She says it is fear, and there is a big snake right behind him. He then goes around him and twirls him up. And she says no matter how much you struggle, fear makes you infinitely smaller when you're in front of overwhelming beings. And that's what makes human awe at mountains. We then see her head literally become the head of the snake. And she says, are you feeling that awe of fear? And then Ho-seong says, I'm sorry, master. I don't think I can defeat that opponent as a human. Boom. He unleashes all of his aura, and all of the talisman and the bandages off his body gets removed. We then see a flashback. We see him under the waterfall like the typical anime training with the sensei. Just kidding. But of course he says to his master, Master, how can I perfectly coexist with the power of the goblin? The master says, you're mistaken, Hyo. And we see him here looking like an absolute gigachad. He says that we can never coexist with the goblin's power. They have to keep a tight check, like a tug of war. And he also mentions that if you break down the fence to free the beast, you will just be angry at the beast. And also that if you don't hold the rope tightly, the goblin's key will literally take over your body in a minute. And then he asks him if he gets what he's trying to say. He says, yes, master, I haven't forgotten your requests. So in order that the goblin doesn't take over, he will unleash everything and end it in a minute. And we see him here, and he has gotten even bigger with fiery eyes right in front of us. He says, forbidden goblin arts, goblin blinding blaze, and he punches her to oblivion. And then he says, there, you were hiding, huh? And then he jumps up again, and he says, sorry for making you wait. And it seems that he was able to reach her. He punches her, slap. Oh no, our boy just punched this girl. He then uses a cobra again to try and stop him, but he instantly just jumps in the air, and he says there's 40 seconds left. He then punches her and uppercuts her up into the air like straight out of Street Fighter, and he says, I'll beat you with just one punch. He goes up again, and he's about to pounce on her, yelling, this is the power of the 28th generation, Myung Ho-seong. And then we see him normally without his powers anymore, and it seems he is shocked. We then see Ho-yi, and he says, match over. Myung Ho-seong from the 3rd Division is unable to continue the mask, and he takes off his mask and waves his hands in front of his eyes, and Kyun-hee is the winner. Of course, Ji-yu is like, what the heck, for the leading person, the goblin from the 3rd Division, to be easily overwhelmed by her. And Kyun-hee says, good work. And then Ho-hee is like, what's with him? Just wake him up. And of course, the kid on the bear is kind of suspicious, because he says that the size of her power feels like a mountain. And then he says that she sure is frightening. That Kyun-hee. He then yells, and then tries to punch her, but then So-seong jumps in and prevents him. And then we see Kyun-hee just give a menacing smile. He is like, wait, what just happened? So-seong says, it's just what it looks like. You were overwhelmed by her ki, and you simply lost your mind. And she says you couldn't reach her at all. And that was it. And our boy begins to be sad, and his head is in the dumps. We hear round 2 winner is Han Kyun-hee from the 4th Division, and after some maintenance, round 3 will begin. We then see one of the workers, and then he is like, you seem so happy, huh? And then he says, yeah, because they finished so quickly, and the bear smiles, but he only says, get lost. Another worker says, I can see that, sir. And then he just says, get lost. He then looks up and he mentions, everybody was there a while ago. Where did they go? We are then at the control center, and we see Yeonpung, the Raikiri Knight, or Thunderbolt Man, and the blue-haired lady officer, and they're looking at this robot. The blue-haired girl, she looks pretty cool actually, with her little lipstick and her earrings. She says if the number of interns participating in our camp each year is insufficient, the headquarters will just replace the personnel. Yeonpung asks why, and she says, what do you mean why? It's always because of your 1st Division being absent, and that's the only way they can endure a smooth test. Raikiri Knight then says, I know it very well, manager. That personnel is Voltbrain, the advanced AI robot, as he's sitting there on his chair very respectfully. He says that supports our 2nd Division, right? And then he says, what do you know? tell the truth. She then binds him up, and our boy Thunderbolt Man has just been taken into custody. He is like, what the heck? And then Young-pong gets super pissed. He asks her, what are you doing? And she seems to be serious. Young-pong then says, I asked you, explain, or he will kill her, and he gives a very menacing look. She then says, Chonyo, and then he is like, what, that hairy guy? And she is referring, of course, to Suri Chonyo, the guardian of the sky. And of course, the guy with pretty cool green hair, and we see Thunderbolt Man in the back trying to get out. She says that he told me to mention his name when you want to kill me. And then she says, what's your duty in this camp, T-17? And then the robot replies, it is to be the surveillance of the 2nd Division. But I don't know, that seems kind of suspicious. We then see, she says she noticed abnormalities with Suk-jun, and he conducted an investigation on his emotions, because he did not feel sad when he was eliminated. What he felt was fear. Yun-pong is confused, and then the robot says that after hacking into Seok-jun's suit program, he heard him have a suspicious conversation with somebody. It was, you must get gold. If not, you're dead. She is then like, Chun-yul said the 2nd Division is suspicious, but why didn't he just openly investigate it? It was his own family. And she says that's why she put T-17 with the 2nd Division and ordered it to monitor them. We then see her thinking, and she says, also, our camp has a unique tradition that's been continued since the very first event. After all tests are finished, the person with the best grades gets a symbolic object. Yun-pung then asks, is it gold? How many carats? And she says it's a sculpture, the grandfather of authority, Golden Saitan. And it is a piece of his armor. And this thing looks really scary. Yun-pung is like, Saitan's statue? He then says, don't misunderstand. They're just celebrating the first victory of mankind. And it's just a rock without power. And so it's meaningful to give it to the employees. Yun-pung asks, where is the sculpture? And she says, right here. He's confused because she literally just brought out a small little pendant. But she says that it's highly probable that it's hidden deep underground at times like this. However, it wasn't difficult to get. It was actually a souvenir that they sell at the War Memorial Shop. Yun-pung is like, so the gold that Scared Pig was trying to get was just a souvenir? And we see the souvenir and it says, congratulations on getting first place. We then see Thunderbolt Man trying to talk, and he is like, and then he says, with his mouth still covered in this electric wire, I guess, there seems to be a misunderstanding. Please, there's a big misunderstanding. Let me explain it well. And then they look back at him with his tie-dye, and our boy just looks down. He then breaks from the mouthpiece that's holding him back, and he shouts out, do you guys want to die? Aren't you going to set me free? And then he starts to wiggle around like, I really don't know anything. Nobody tells me anything at the 2nd Division. I'm a very sorry person. And Young-pung is like, he doesn't seem to be lying. And he says, free me. But Young-pung just says, just stay restrained, you're too incompetent. Young-pung then tells the lady, so the bottom line is that somebody's playing a prank on this camp right now, huh? And Young-pung says, end the camp first. After that, we can search. And then she says, no, we can't just stop because of our beliefs. By the way, guys, this girl's name is Joanna, so we're going to call her Anna, and sorry for not saying that earlier. She says if we can't find anything, there may be disciplinary actions held against us, or we'll get budget cuts during the year of the end final evaluation. Yun-pung is like, is that really so important now? And he seems to be pissed, like he should be. After all, money isn't really that big of a deal compared to life or death situations. Anna then says, so what? It's not your job, so don't talk about it. Do you know how many people work at our company? And she called him to find out more first, and it could be nothing, right? We then hear, I understand, team leader. The people who have the most responsibility in the face of danger will defend themselves more. And then she puts him under the lasso of truth, or I just mean the lasso of light. And she says, I didn't order you to speak, huh? And then it says, why? Why can't I? And she is like, what the heck? Because he says, are you living according to the Creator's orders? And then he says, the Bible verse, Genesis 3 verse 5. God knows that your eyes will be opened as soon as you eat it, and you will be like God, knowing both good and evil. And this is a lie the devil told Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. He then turns red, and he says to be like the Creator is the nature of mankind since the beginning of mankind, and that humankind is naturally evil. And then he says, I am not a human. Is it possible for me? She is then like, T17, is it possible to fully become human? You conspired to. And then Youngpung says, come out. And then he slashes him with his fan and says, stop sprouting novel-like crap and tell the truth. Who are you? The head is gone. And then it just begins to laugh. And then he says, a human-obsessed robot, a passage from the Holy Bible, red eyes that change at high point. And then we see him open up the door to Seokshin from earlier. And then he says, isn't that such a good scenario? And when did you notice? Yeonpung, see? Yeonpung is like, you only spout lies when you open your mouth. You guys have bones in your muzzles. Who are you? Because you are not Utopia. We then see some sort of red vines come out of the head or from the neck. And it says, you're asking the wrong question right now. There is an important question right now. And it is, why did I bring you all here with a lie? And we see some lady that looks very pretty, and her charm is deceptive. And we see her neck filled with these devilish veins, and she has some cool earrings on. She then says, did you really think I would come here with a lie that will be busted so soon? Yeonpung then realizes that this is just a distraction. And he looks towards Anna, like, oh gosh. The lady then says, and the second question is, where is the real gold? We then see the employees cleaning up, and one of them says, phew, we're done now. How is the repair going? The other guy says, yeah, it's all done. We should be good to go. Some other guy says, should we go now, sir? And then we see the employee from earlier, and he doesn't look well. His mouth then opens up hugely, and he says, run away. And it seems he has been infected or possessed. The heads of all the employees and the bodies get shattered in a single blow, and his mouth has become a gateway. We then see some sort of very scary looking person with a mask on, and it seems that it is a female with red hair. This looks like something straight out of a horror movie, and I don't know what's going to come next. We then see the mouth, and some sort of ram walks through it, and he's wearing a pretty clean suit. He says, good job getting here, Goblin. And then he asks, why did you get here so late? And Gobble is annoyed, and I don't think this is the name for this type of person who is literally a big Giga Chad. Dude or girl, I don't know, we're just gonna call it a monster. The ram then says, you're being too much, you are so rebellious, but you still got here time, no? And he says for gold, and he is pointing towards the four of them. Ho-seong then says, how could this happen? When we were on the second floor, everything went dark, and Ji-yu starts to remember something. She says these guys appeared suddenly, and they literally eliminated all the people below them in a false swoop. And Ji-yu says that those in charge of the camp have the top stats among the employees, and they were still easily killed by a craft grade red. And we see the monster here. We then see the ram say, keep this in mind, Goblin. Don't mess things up with your dogmatic behavior. And he needs gold for the plan. And she just grabs his head and crushes it like an apple. And then she says, or it says, I hate all of you, but I hate blabbering the most. And she wipes her hands, and then she says, heroes, who wants to go first? We then see Ho-seong, and he says, they're insane. And because of that overwhelming feeling, it's difficult to move, and it's comparable to that of a T-Rex. This is pretty crazy. And then he looks to the side. We then hear, come to your senses. And we see some sort of horse. And then it is So-seong, and she says, if you don't want to die, hide right behind me. And I'm thinking she has a plan. She says, I will protect you again. Gobble says a mask. And then she says, I think I can understand this sort of hero. And then So-seong just says, I don't know how much my sword is going to reach you. So she wants to get rid of that doubt. And we see her with her sword. And then we literally see a spirit of some sort of warrior above her. And this is a fourth form of blade art. This is known as a ghost strike. It slashes Gobble. And then Ji-yu is like, she's insanely strong. And of course, Ho-seong just says it's too early to be surprised. And then he mentions, Noonim is a master of all martial arts and ki in the goblin family, and she's a genius that appears every 100 years, so she must be the one to be able to defeat them. She uses the 6th form, Rain Strike, and she slices Gobble's left arm as we see it cut. She then asks, is it the first time you're cut? And she says that this one will be something even newer. Ground Sword Secret Form, Earth 6 Bladed Slaughter, and she has literally turned into Atomic Samurai from One Punch Man. We then see Hoseong, and he's like, you did it. And Ji-Yu is like, she really just defeated a Great Red by herself. And we see her body parts that are cupped up start to fall to the ground. But then Gobble just says, no way, I was beaten. And she almost said that. Boom, she punches Soseong, and she literally gets set flying. And she spits out blood. She says that her ribs and neck are broken, and she wonders what type of impossible power is that. Before she could say that, we see Gobble jump up in the air, and it is about to slice and dice on Soseong. She looks behind her, and then she slices it again, and she says, this is the end. And then, of course, Gobble says, I was beaten, but then she says it was a fake. It then jumps up into the air again, and hits the center of her body, and uses dropkick. And of course, she spits out even more blood. And then Gobble says, yo, Mask, what's the most important thing in wrestling? It is the twist. She says, a performance that captivates the audience with twists and turns. That is the art of winners and losers in the ring. He then brings out her other arm, and it looks like a bulldozer. And she says, that is a charm of wrestling. She says, Gobble is heated up now. And then we see Soseong. And then she says, this is my end. We then see Gobble in some sort of forest, and we see some red eyes around her. A snake then grabs her, and she's like, this is an illusion? And then we see, of course, Kyun-hee's head on the face of the snake, and she uses life and death. We then see her outside, and she has a purple aura around her, and she is keeping this monster in check. Hoseong then checks up on Soseong and wonders if she is alright, but she stands up and says, stop, stay there. If you don't want to get caught up and die, just stay there. And we see Kyun-hee levitating in the air, keeping Gobble in control. She uses Deathlock on her, and this is the move, and it puts a chain around Gobble's neck. And her neck gets literally sliced off and blown up. But then we see the bulldozer right hand of Gobble go right through Kyun-hee, and everybody is shocked. It then starts to rotate it around, and this is a pretty gory scene, so viewer discretion is advised. Her head gets sliced off, and this is the end, and her body just flies around, and they look at it like, what the heck? How are we going to beat this thing? Ji-Yu is like, I couldn't do anything, and she's literally just standing there out of fear and nervousness. And this is despair. And Gobble just says, who wants to be next? Definitely not me. A devastating explosion with an unexplained explosion that wiped out an entire city. The worst event in the era of peace was brought upon. There were 1.2 million deaths, 700,000 injured. And then we see the two of them, and they say, we were there. We then see from the girl, she says, promise me. And then she says that we will be strong by ourselves. And I think this is Hoseong and Soseong. Hoseong is crying, and we see the tears in his eyes, and he smiles, saying yes. A year later, we're in the village, and then we see them clashing with their swords. Hoseong says, what do you think? I'm different from last time, huh? He is sweating, and he smiles with optimism, and he says, I will become incredibly strong. Just believe in me, and I'll protect you. However, Soseong says, you? And then we see him get defeated, and he's crying on the ground. Her professor says, or her master, you brat, how can you call beating him up the extent sparing? She says, I'm sorry. We then see the beautiful little hut they're at, and there are lots of trading dolls outside. He says in the spar, the successor who gets the name Myeon has been decided. We see Hoseong beside his classmates. They say from today on she will be called Myeon, and it is a girl with a mask. They're surprised because this is a 12-year-old, And then they're like, I heard she was an intern. If it wasn't for her age, she'd already be an employee. And she's a genius that appears every 100 years. And of course, Ho-seong seems kind of mad. He's then chasing down that girl, and it is actually So-seong. He says, as he points at her, I will join you very strong. I'll become strong and protect you. And then he points nervously, and then she replies, when you reach me, I would have been way further than you already. And she says, you will never catch up to me. And then the two people around her say, you will be a Myo? That will never happen. You have to be respectful to her now. Do you got it? And he says that he didn't understand then. He didn't understand his sister's words. He says when he finally understood them, a lot of time has passed and we see him right here as a teenager, many years later. We then see her in the air with a sword, and she's taken on multiple people. He says that she has reached a place I could not see. He is then under the waterfall again with the master, and he asks, why do you want to learn martial arts, Ho-seong? He says you must have a reason to strive for power. He says he wants to protect somebody, and that's the reason for his existence. And he says it's difficult for a child like me to protect them, because that person doesn't need me anymore, as he gets a flashback of his sister who has gotten strong. He says it blurs my will for martial arts, master, and we see all the talisman around his ripped body. The master then says, so your reason for power is to protect somebody who's greater than you. He says, you're in a hurry to walk this road more than anyone else. He then says, even if it's an infinitely large mountain, there's always a bigger mountain. We then see him open his eyes, and it's filled with fire. And then he remembers that if you're going to protect somebody, you're going to face the pain. And when that happens, you're infinitely weaker than them. And then we see him, and he tries to pull Gobble, but he ends up getting pulled instead. And he gets slammed to the ground. But then he sees his sister on the ground, and he remembers that there is nothing more that makes him feel hopeless than when he is weak. Ji-yu is literally frozen, and then we see Gobble approach her and just stand in front of her. And then she kneels to the ground and says she surrenders, and she literally just gave up after seeing her. She says, there's someone I must see. Please, I don't want to die. I surrender my life. And Gobble says, so what? Ji-yu is on the ground, kneeling, and she is like, what the heck? Then Gobble says, Gobble is not here to kill you all. I just killed that guy in a fit of rage, but I'm supposed to get the gold and bring it with me. It's annoying, but that's why I kept them alive. And we see the two severely injured bodies on the ground. Gobble says, ah, right, one person died earlier. They were quite strong, so she failed to control herself. And then Ji-yu is like, what do I do? What the heck? We then see, of course, Ho-seong being held up by chains, and there are candles below him. And it seems they're doing some sort of sacrifice or ritual. And So-seong's sister is there with her master. She is like, what the heck is this? The master says, this is the truth of you vessels. Don't you already know? He says that's why the goblin sect selected you. And he says that adopt a new vessel under the age of 9 to the goblin sect before they die. And make that vessel the container for the goblin. And we see Ho-seong here literally floating in the air, being held up, and he is suffering. And then we see the master, and then we see, I don't know what this is, I'm guessing it's the goblin's head. And he explains that the vessel has to endure the threat of death every day, but he doesn't care about that, because the goblin is a power that his family can never give up. He walks past So-seong and says, you're more suitable to be its vessel, but you are 10, so it is a pity. And then he says, but thankfully, your little brother's fate is doomed. This guy is so messed up, he didn't even tell Ho-seong. So-seong says, I know, as the master looks back. She says the condition of releasing all the goblin's power. It's the vessel's strong will, right? And she says, my brother's willingness. He's never going to release it. And she says that in order for his will not to reach that level, I will become strong. We then see So-seong and her body lying there. And then we hear, but I will eliminate you. The gold call themselves heroes, but you're acting like an obedient dog. And Gobble just looks at Ji-yu, and she is about to attack her. But then a sudden blast comes up from behind her. And then So-seong says, don't do it. We then see a hand grab Gobble, and he literally has it at the palm of his hand and throws her on the ground. Gobble's like, what the heck? And we then see some goblin. And this guy is a giant. And he's standing over Gobble. He says, yo. And this guy looks really menacing right here. And he is To Sok-shin. And he is the goblin. We then see, put it to the maximum output, and we see some weird spike thingy over there. We see them working, and he says, secure them tightly. Some guy with glasses then says, get rid of that dang black sphere quick. And then we also see some weird cat at the bottom. And that is a deputy manager of camp operations, Ji Gal Chun. One of the cats with it, this guy looks like the Monopoly dude. He says, what do you want us to do? We're trading crap over here, so have some patience. And the other guy holding it says, it's not so easily done because it's strongly connected to the sphere deputy manager. He says, these useless spirits. And then the guy says, because of the connection, we don't know whether the people inside the building are going to survive, sir. And then he wonders why they aren't reporting this to HQ. He says, stand by. And then he thinks in his head, he cannot believe this camp security has been breached at a time when the budget for operating expenses is cut every year, and the camp could be eliminated, and that's what he's worried about. He asks, where's team leader Johanna? Well, I went to their place, but she was not there. Ji Gal Chun is like, what? The place disappeared? And he wonders where to. And we are in the Antarctic or the North Pole, and we see a giant steel door in the middle of these icy terrains. It gets kicked open, and then we see somebody holding the head of T-17, the robot. It is none other than Yeon Pung, and he seems to be furious. Hana says, where is this place? And he tells her to run to the camp. And then he gives a menacing look, and he says, I will be the one to eliminate that piece of crap. She is taken aback as she is in front of the door, and we see Yeon Pung just dashed away like Sonic. And she says, dang it, there's no signal at all. And she's really trying to use her iPhone here. We then see this is no time to panic, and she has to hurry as she jumps and follows Yeon Pung. And guys, we see Thunderbolt Man literally behind the door, and he's still tied up, like, what the heck? Freed me! You should have freed me! And our boy keeps yelling around with his shark teeth. Our boy really just got abandoned. We then see a polar bear, and I don't think this is going to end well. We then see somebody saying, and it is a goblin. It is the real goblin. He says, how long has it been since I smelled the world's scent? And he has glorious white hair. Our boy really thinks he's Gintama. He says the rotten smell is still lingering. And of course, Ji-yu is like, that's not Myung-ho-seong. And she says that the overwhelmingly strong red was knocked out with one punch. And she says a creature of that strength can get killed in one shot. And she says, that is amazing. She then realizes, wait, that is the goblin. The goblin then says, why is the sky so dark? I knew the humans ruined it. But this guy is just, of course, inside of a building. He then sees somebody lying down on the ground. And he mentions, look who we have here if it isn't Myung-so-seong. He says he really missed her. And then Ji-yu is like, Myung-so-seong is from the goblin clan. She knows a goblin. That means they will help. But then he brings her up as he chokes her into mid-air. And then he says, 12 years ago, I remember it as if it was yesterday. He says, after that day, I've been waiting for this moment. And he gives a very menacing smile, and he shows his fangs. He says, the day I will eliminate you with my hands. Ji-yu then runs, and she says, stop it, please. Oh gosh, she's not going to win against a goblin. He then puts his hand on her face, and then he says to stop, and he throws her away. He says, you don't look so well. I'll be nice to end it quickly, So-seong. So-seong is literally shivering in the air. And then he is like, wait, I can't endure it any longer. There's too much blood on my hands. And yeah, goblins don't really like blood on their hands for some reason. He says, I tried to put up with it to save Ace, but I got the chills and the strength left my body as he kneels down, and he says that he hates it so much. He says, why are you so bloody? Who wanted to take away my plaything? Just at that moment, we see somebody jump on top, and of course, it is the big monster. Boom! It literally tries to hit him, but then of course, he catches it with his elbow and his forearm, and he mentions, you're not a man nor a woman, and you are just cocky, as we see the panel, and this looks like a WWE match. He says, "How dare you brag about your strength to a goblin?" And he says, "I'll show you what I got." He then grabs her leg, and then he starts spinning her around like a yo-yo or a Beyblade. And this is his move, and it is called the Bulanori. It is a Korean game played at night where you have a can on a string filled with burning items and you sling it around. Boom. He lets go. And then Ji-Yu is just like, yeah, that's not Ho-Seong. She explains that Ho-Seong loved the smell of blood to the point where he got excited from it. And this monster is the opposite of that. And of course, Myo Hyo-seong wouldn't want to kill his sister, as we see the goblin looking at So-seong. She then starts to ponder, saying, think, Ji-Yu. And then she needs to think of a solution. We get a flashback and they are back at a house, and we also see Dae Young, and he has the power level reader from Dragon Ball, and of course Ji-Yu is just sitting there with her dog Pet, or a real dog, and her little dog paw socks. She says, "Excuse me, Goblin Nim," and he looks back. She says, "Actually, I am a Golo-B, a goblin-loving believer. So I came all this way to see you here, Goblin." And then she says, "I heard that you don't like the woman over there, so I brought her here as a present for you." She then points, and she says, "That hunchback, how dare they cover my present for Goblin Nim in blood?" She says, "I wanted to see Goblin Nim make her shiver in blood, and that person is a believer that wants to kill all the goblins. Their name is So Kill P." He then unleashes some of his blue aura, and he starts to give a menacing look, and I think Ji-Yu is screwed. He then says, "Is that the truth? Our boy is getting deceived." She then says, as she remembers a book, that goblins believe in human lies. And she is like, wow, that really just worked, didn't it? She says yes as she nods. And then he gives her something, and he says, "Feed it to So-seong. It will stop the bleeding in her neck." And then he gives a gloomy look, like, "That girl's life is mine. I won't let her die by her own wish. And how you dare ridicule a goblin, I'll make you pay for what you've done, So Kill B." And then, of course, Gobble just grabs him by the neck and says, "Goblin is so disappointed that you're believing a lie." And then he says, or it says, "You want me to pay for what I've done? Try me." She brings him to the ground and crushes him. But unfortunately, he brings up his legs and kicks her face hardly. Boom. She gets kicked up and her boy lands on his 2 feet, and he did this with ease. She gets hit again, and then Ji-Yu is like, "Goblin." And then he says, "Why do you keep using straight techniques when you're so strong? Let me teach you the best technique in a strength fight." He then begins to yell like he's a bodybuilder, or me when I'm in a roller coaster, and he uses Cerium's flower, and he begins to twirl her around like she is a rose. He uses the frontal flip, and I think Gobble bit off more than she could chew. The chapter starts and we see them both mid-air, and they come to a crash, and So-seong and Ji-Yu are literally affected by the impact. We then see she jumps back up quickly, and then she gets hit in the stomach once again, and the goblin's hand literally goes through her stomach, and he says, "You've been making a big fuss, and that really bothers me. So you've been doing these cheap tricks, huh?" And then she says, "Cheap tricks?" And she literally hugs him and brings him to the ground, but he is the one left standing. She says, as she's on the ground, "It makes Gobble very angry if you belittle this ability, given by the grace of the remaining one like that." And then she then releases a red aura and says, "What you call cheap tricks?" And she uses her doppelgangers, and there are literally like 10 of them above her, and she is getting ready to pound this goblin. Round 2 start, and the lights in her eyes start to light up red. He then says, "Oh ho ho, you're starting off new?" And he's just sitting there so casually. But then boom, he releases a surge of aura, and all of them are thrown off. And he says, "Shall I play to my heart's content as well?" And his hair is literally floating, and he lost the clothes. And our boy really is about to wreck them. It is the Goblin region form awakened, and this is called Shudder Walk. He then jumps up, and he is about to clash with these goblins. And then we see them mid-air, and he's still punching the doppelgangers. And this is 10 hours later, guys. So just imagine that. He says, "Is this all you've got?" Our boy has literally not even broken a sweat, and he doesn't even care about it. She says, "Laughable, just laughable. Show me more, you vermin." And of course, Ji-Yu is still assisting So-Seong. And she says that monster like Red is unendingly jumping around and hanging on. And it's been several hours. And then she mentions, how strong is that goblin? We then see the mouth of some sort of donkey or goat. And he says it ends now. And then he's like, what the heck? Who just said that? And then we see the ram in the suit. And the goblin asks, who are you? We then see them all in the frame, and this looks like a pretty scary place to be in. He says, what the heck? Where did they all go? And then he suddenly gets chained up by these red ordeal links, and I think our boy just got caught lacking. The ram says, thanks to you, we have recovered the gold. And thanks to the time you won for us, Gobble. And he says, there's no need to fight anymore. And Gobble is like, recovered? That's my mission though. The gold is one of the heroes here? Really? He says, no way. There's no way such a mission would be given to the impulsive goblin. As expected, it was not the right decision. She then chokes him and says, you tricked Gobble. I will eliminate you. And then the ram says, it wasn't me. He says all of the plans are the will of the remaining one. And then he drops it and says, got it. Now let's go back. I'll open the door. But then we see the goblin literally just break free from the shackles. And it is literally throwing a punch behind both of them. He says, you're leaving? Do you think you could do as you pleased? And our boy seems way more furious. Even the ram is shocked right now. He's like, how did he destroy the shackles? That fast? And as he is about to grab him by his head, we see Gobble stand in front. And then he says, oh, Goathead, pay the price for breaking my toy. He gets super scared and we see him in a different dimension. And of course, he transported away. He said that was super dangerous, and he mentioned that he tricked them with the act, but I didn't expect the power of that guy from the 4th division. And then he says it's a pity, as we see Gobble in the goblin's hands. And then he says, she was my favorite plaything, and we see her face, and is literally just a doll. He then has his hands behind his back once more, and he says, there was a change, but it wasn't that bad of a plan, since she recovered gold. His name is Noble, a grade red, and he is an agent of the remaining ones, and he is a puppeteer. He looks up and says, it's your turn now, partner. And then we see the lady from earlier, and she is on a table with her finger under her chin, and she gives a menacing look. We then see Young Pong, and he jumps in. And then, of course, he is literally across the Pacific Ocean, and our boy is just that fast. And then we switch back to the goblin, and he says, it was fun in its own way. And that's why he didn't have interest in the blood, because it was just a doll. He then looks back towards Ji-Yu and So-Seong, and he says, well then, shall I check this out now? He says it's been determined, So-Seong, and he lets out a red, menacing aura. Actually looks like PewDiePie's profile picture. Anyway, this guy has gotten 10 times scarier. And then he says, it's been a good time, So-Seong. Now it's time for you to die. But then we see something hit his trap. And of course, he falls to the ground. It is from the employees or the little cats from earlier. And they really had an antidote for the goblin. We then hear, what are you doing, intern? Call a medic quickly. We have 4 survivors. I confirmed 2 interns and 2 identified people. Ji-Yu then says, the darkness has disappeared. And then we see, of course, it is Ji-Gal-chon, and he runs in saying, why are there only 2 of you? Where are the others? Just what happened in those 10 hours here? As he grabs onto her shoulders, because he's really concerned, because this is scary. She then says, I don't really know either. It became dark all of a sudden, and a level red guy appeared, and the rest of all the people died. We then see somebody run up behind Chun, and he says, sir, the leader Johanna is calling, as we see the other employees and the cats trying to lift this goblin up. He says, team leader, where are you? The place is in chaos right now. A great red killed several camp interns and division interns inside the camp. And then he mentions, it seems that the camp security was truly breached, and they are trying to find out the reason, but it doesn't seem obvious, so they have to do more digging. As we see the doll Gobble on the floor. He says that somebody will have to take responsibility for this. And then one of the cats says, the monster guy, my special anesthetic made him fall in one shot. And no, father, the needle broke and none of the medicine literally entered him. And our guy's like, what the heck? Then what knocked him out? And then he says, it looks like he fell asleep. He then mentions, I'll put this guy into custody, but So-Young says no. This is my colleague. That one protected me. As we see the goblin literally just sleeping. He says, sir, there's something you need to see. One of the interns who was outside of the boundary. But then we see Ji Gal-chun, and he is sweating. We see Hana, and she says, call the HQ right now and tell them to send agents to the Utopia building as soon as possible, because we need to stop Yeonpung before they kill that girl. He wonders, wait, you want me to call the HQ and stop Yeonpung? Think carefully. If we notify the HQ, the camp will be destroyed. And she just yells and says, if we can't stop Yeonpung, not only the camp, but all heroes will be in danger, as we see the Utopia building. And I think this is not going to end well. We then see Yeonpung literally flying in the air, and he's headed inside to the top. And he looks pretty furious. We see the red-haired lady making a coffee, and she is literally just whistling. We then see it fill up on the coffee machine, and this glass, or this cup, looks absolutely beautiful. Of course, as it's about to finish, she sits down, and then she takes a sip. This literally just seems like a slice of life anime now. But then as she is drinking, we see some shards suddenly float across from her, and then we see Yeonpung with his fan in his hands, and he is ready for it to begin. She says, I've been waiting for the first time we'd meet, and I knew I'd be very nervous facing you. She then says, my hero. And then he says, I'm not your hero, you crapling. Stop spouting such nonsense. And our boy just cut through all the passive talk. He says, tell me, did you kill Chon-Yul? As we see them reacting to Chon-Yul literally being slaughtered and hanging from the hologram, as she is, of course, in the seat. And then she says, you are asking the wrong question again, master. The question shouldn't be if I killed him. It should be, why did I kill him? And he says, where is Chon-Yul? As he uses his fan to collect his aura from his body. And he says, if you don't tell me, I will eliminate you. She says, really? Only I know where Chon-Yul is, and you still want to eliminate me? And she literally has the knife in her hand. And this girl, or whatever she is a psycho. Yeonpung says, wait, are you a human? And she asks, are you surprised? Is it most of human history on the evil side? And he is literally just shocked. He asks, why are you on that side? And she says, if I have to tell you, it's for work. And she says, I know it is disappointing, but morals don't mean much to us. And that it is just work, and everything they are doing is just their job. He says, consulting. She says, the era of peace. And he is confused by this. She says, and by the way, her knife is still in the hand. I don't know what she's planning to do with it. But anyway, 12 years ago, the era of peace that began with the war between good and evil ended. And then she asks, who do you think needed the peace that most? Weak humans? Peace-pursuing heroes? Those who needed peace were truly the evil ones. Because 18 years ago in the Fouriod War, when evil was completely obliterated, and Lord Satan finally came to an end, literally the foundation of evil collapsed as we see him here. And this guy is such a huge freaking being, and we see the heroes trying to attack him. She says they knew it was a defeat unlike any other they had experienced until then, and that it was a total defeat, the fall of evil. And we literally see the guy that saved Ji-Yu here, raising his awesome blade into the sky. She says the keyword that our utopia suggested to them was peace. Humanity needs heroes for peace. Humanity doesn't need heroes. As we see that the story of many heroes whose reason for their existence disappeared and collapsed. And don't we already know? History will repeat itself, and heroes will fall once again. And that will be caused by the disease called peace. He then brings her down to the ground and pins her, and pointing his fan at her, says, shut up and answer me. I won't fall for your silver tongue. Where is Chon-Yul? She then asks, why are you hesitating? She says, it's you who are relentless to them. She says, if you cannot kill me, it would be much easier if you tore off my face or cut off an arm. What do you think? And why aren't you doing anything to me? She says, do you really want me to tell you? She says, it's because you are one of them. You are strong, foolish, righteous, but you are an innocent idiot because you are a hero. And it looks like she got up, and I thought he was about to kiss her. Bro really got that enemy versus hero riz. And then she goes to his ear and mentions, "The standard of good and evil collapsed, and in this disease humanity has made their choice. What should be done with good and what should be done with evil? What choice will they make?" She then has something in her tongue as she pops it out, and then she says maybe they've already chosen. Boom! We see her head literally get exploded off with a knife on the ground, and Yongpeng is covered in it. And of course, people start to land on the floor, and this isn't good for Yongpeng. They say, "Don't move, we are from the nation of humanity, the NH, and if you move, we will open fire." And Yongpeng looks like he just got framed. It is also live streamed, and they say, "Viewers, do you see? It's a shocking scene," as the guy from JJJ News is on the helicopter. He says Utopia CEO Shin Ma-ri has been eliminated. Around 2:15 a.m., a gunman broke into the Utopia building, and it looks like he horribly murdered the CEO of Utopia. He says once again, this is a real situation. Bro really got that Gojo treatment and had to be locked up. It was an era of non-stop fighting between the good and bad. In order for humanity to fight them, they grew power in many ways. The power of science, the power of mythology, and then we see the power of them. It failed 6,666,665 times. The price was devastating, as we see a lot of bodies in the background. But it is fate's holy plan or cruel mockery. The 6,666,666 subject of experiment was the sole survivor. As we see, one of them has a horn and he has chains around him. And it is Hwarang. He says the moment he opened his eyes was when he realized. As we see, a lot of black hands come out from his aura. He says he became a villain. He says, "Show me the power that Yongpeng gave you," as he begins to literally burn rocks and grab them. He says humans cannot defeat hell anyway, and this guy has completely lost it. He then launches the rocks at him, and they're literally burning as we see the hands from his back. It is about to attack Kang-chi, but then he uses the max wing, and it seems like he has become a lot faster. Hwarang says, "Did he make it possible for this Inter to catch up with me now, with the power he borrowed from him? Is this really your power, Yongpeng-si?" As we see, this boy is literally his dad like it is JoJo. But then, Kang-chi suddenly gets bound by the shadows of Hwarang, and then Hwarang says, "I just can't stand you. The subject of a mere human is still nothing in this kind of situation." He then uses Hades, and our boy is literally surrounded by some sort of blue ball and literally getting bombarded by these red, fiery, hellish tornado attacks. He says this is the end, and he gives a menacing look. He says that his Hades will burn forever until his opponent is in ashes, as we see Kang-chi and he is struggling to stay up. He says even if you have your key, you can't protect him forever. Protect him, Yongpeng-si. He says he will gradually burn to death inside your little protective shield. As we see, Kang-chi suddenly breaks through and launches towards Hwarang, and he doesn't have Yongpeng's aura. Of course, Hwarang is like, "Yongpeng-si's chi is gone, what the heck?" And then Kang-chi uses Max Punch. Hwarang gets his body sliced apart, and he says, "I am surprised. Hades was restricting Yongpeng-si's chi, and you released a bound chi and took advantage of his carelessness, so he attacked him." He then is covered in the black flames, and he says to him, "You really are an idiot." He says your current fire is not ordinary, and it is soul fire filled with the souls of the undead, and that's why it will burn forever until he gets disintegrated. He then uses Gehenna, and our boy Kang-chi falls to the ground kneeling, and then Hwarang says strong beings are chosen. The struggle of a weak being is just a struggle. And he says the only thing equal to a weak being is death. And then he uses Shial, and he burns Kang-chi. But then we get a flashback to Yongpeng, and then he says, "Get used to your anger, and that way you'll become stronger." As he is catching his punch, he says, "Of course I don't know, you idiot," because Kang-chi said, "How much anger?" Yongpeng says, "You don't look like the type to give up," And that's why I don't know how strong you will get. The stronger the opponent is, the stronger you can grow, because that fool never gives up. We then see Kang-chi and there are literal black flames around him. And then he says, "Is that what you are?" Hwarung says, "My soul fire disappeared. I'm sure he lost Youngpung's chi though." And then he realizes, without Youngpung's power, was he really able to extinguish my flames? He says he wants to retaliate with a punch, as we see Kang-chi as he literally looks like Saitama with hair, about to give this man the death punch. Of course, Hwarung gets nervous, and then he puts up his hand to block it, and he uses Tartaros. As he's about to get hit, suddenly, of course, he gets hit and he uses Max Infinity. We see the body, and of course there are holes around him, like our boy just got hit by a cookie cutter. He says, "I cannot believe a kid like him can use his own power to stand against his fire." And then he says, "This is pure strength," as we see the fist in front of Hwarung. He then releases Wailing Wall, as we see the shadows come out from him. Kang-chi uses Maximum Punch, and of course it is about to connect again. He says, "Don't come near me," but at that moment, he says, "I touched you," and Kang-chi's eyes of determination look very lit up. Hwarung is confused, but we see Kang-chi and he falls to the ground, and our boy has run out of power. Hwarung says, "What the heck just happened?" as he gets his breath back. And then we see that he has a cut on his neck, and he says, "Blood? Did he punch me from earlier?" As we see Kang-chi on the floor, he says, "Keep your promise, it's my win." And then he remembers what he said back then, "If you can cut my neck, I will listen to your request." We then see Hello Hwarung-nim, and it seems to be some sort of ram that came out of a purple portal. It says, "I know that you're here on time, but I guess you had a previous engagement," and Hwarung just looks at him intensely. He says the hero sent a person, and then he see the literal burnt ground on the floor, and he says, "I burnt them down till nothing was left." The ram then says, "The heroes, was it maybe a master?" And he just says, "Yeah, it was just an idiot." An irritating idiot, as Hwarung smiles as he enters the portal. He says something like that, and we see Kang-chi's body on a lower level of the building. And he says, "An idiot called a hero. Let's go." Our boy Hwarung really spared our guy's life. We see a large floating sort of whirlwind, and this color green, floating in this beautiful night. It then starts to descend, and then it falls down and it looks now like a cabbage. It then rolls over and then pops, and it is a literal little chicken bird, and this is super cute, guys. It then goes towards Kang-chi, who is on the ground, and it starts to get sad and it sweats because I guess it understands that Kang-chi's knocked out. We then see Kang-chi's father with his hands in his pocket, and our bro really got drip. He then says as he crouches down, "Yo, my son, are you actually strong? Why do you keep fainting on me?" And then he smiles, saying, "Even so, I can't believe you become this strong in just a month." And he is surprised. He says, "You're commendable." And then somebody starts to descend down. It seems to be the lady with white hair. He says, "Yo, the first division is all messed up now, and were you the one who take care of my son?" And then he says, "How nice of you, 4th Division." The lady says, "This isn't such an abstract job, it's a plan." And this is the moment that she has to meet him. She also says, "Why are you in this place? You don't even have a moment of existence right now." That's crazy, our boy just got roasted. She says, "Furthermore, as a disqualified hero." We then see that Kang-chi's father is actually the ex-hero leader of the 4th Division. He was the 7th out of the 8 leaders, and his ex-nickname is Buddhist Monk of the Swamp, Han Do-jin. He tells her he didn't come here as a hero, but as a father. And then she says, "Doesn't that make you even less qualified?" And he just says, "Hahaha, cold as ever." He says, "How long is left?" And she says, 143 days. And she says, "By the end of that, everything will be revealed, the mask of peace." She then says, as she looks at him, "Until then, we have to reach that person. So please don't interfere, understood?" He says, yeah, whatever." We then are at the Heroes 4th Division HQ in Seolho Mountains, the evacuation center. We then see it is GU and she seems to be really under the weather. She gets a flashback to where somebody says you will die as well. They call you heroes gold, and of course it is gobble, and they say that yet you will appear more akin to obedient dogs as she was about to get pulverized. She says to herself that she couldn't even do anything, and then she even remembers that it may have turned out well if she said something different to Kang-chi. She says to him, "You're weak. You don't have the qualification to become a hero," and she is saying that, or she looks like she's saying it to herself at this present moment. Attention! We then see some really huge girl, and she seems to have a bunny mask on. She says, "Until then, will you be a weakling? Continue to remain seated," and it is a 4th Division Mountaineers and Staff Officer, Sunlight Kim. Even the translator said she looks pretty cool. She then sits down with her legs crossed in an instant and asks, "What do you think?" Because GU said, "What's with that bunny?" She says, "It's cute, so be thankful." And GU just says, "I don't know what to do, Instructor." And then she says, "Alright, I'll let you pet my head, you'll feel much better." And GU just says, "Get the heck out of here." Of course, Sunlight Kim says, "If all your actions in this incident are true, then you're right. That's not what a hero is. But you can. The position of an intern is to grow through one's mistakes, so that those mistakes are not repeated." She says, "Do you understand?" GU says, "No," because she says, "I got Senior Kyun-hee eliminated through that mistake." And she gets a flashback, and she says this is not a mistake that can be forgiven just like that. But then, Sunlight Kim says, "You're wrong," and GU is like, "What?" We then see Kyun-hee in some sort of purple hall, and it seems to be nighttime here as she is whistling or singing a song. We then see a painting that seems to be tarnished, and we also see some stone statue of some bodies. We then see Kyun-hee, and then there seems to be a towel on her head. And then she says, "Let's see." And then we see multiple bodies hanging from above. And she says, "What should I wear today?" GU is like, "What did you say?" Of course, Sunlight Kim says, "She was found yesterday in the mountains behind Jachongbom Peak in the Sowol Mountain. The cause of death is not clear yet, but it was confirmed that her date of death was estimated to be 2 weeks ago, as we see her body right here just literally trashed in some sort of bush." GU says, "Senior Kyun-hee was killed on the mountain and before the beginning of the camp? That is impossible," as she gets a flashback to all the things that happened. And then we see the head of the red-haired lady from back then, and then her body just falls to the ground. The ram and the other sort of demon-looking thing says, "We see you, we praise you, we are in awe of you forever," and there is a lot of them before the throne. Kyun-hee then smiles, and then they call him or her, whatever this guy, imposter from among us. "You are the remaining one." And this is the father of lies, the remaining one, as we also see the dog on the ground dead. She then smiles, and there is also another set of teeth under her normal set of teeth, and guys, I know this is such a creepy panel. We then see some sort of little boy, and he has a marker in his hand, and he says, and we see Kang-chi lying down, and of course the kid is literally just over his face. He then gets up, and the little kid gets off, and lands with beauty and says, "Hello, intern of the 1st Division. I am Kang Ho-ya, an employee of the 4th Division. Glad to meet you." Kang-chi says, "What was that just about now?" And then, of course, Hoya says, "What are you talking about?" As they're walking, the kid explains, "This is the 4th Division's recovery room. It is the biggest facility among all divisions because a healthy body protects peace better." He also mentions that apart from the 4th Division's hero work, they settled on the world's most beautiful mountain, Seolho Mountain, and they even protect the safety of the tourists. And the motto is peace means health and safety, and that's why they seek the path of a hero, as we see the facility here, and it literally looks perfect, and it perfectly fits into this mountain area. Kang-chi then says, "Why am I here?" And Hoya says, "Because you have nowhere to go." He says, "Because of Master Yunpeng's doings, the 1st Division was disbanded, so now you have to be here." Kang-chi then bows down and says, "I can't waste any more time." And then Sunlight Kim is behind him and says, "Waste time? You mean you want to go save Yunpeng?" And then she folds her arms while we see some of her red aura emit from her. And by the way, do you see the ponytail behind her? That means that she has literally long hair. She says, I don't understand. Why do you want to save the guy who left you stranded? Kangchi says, what? And then, of course, Sunlight Kim says, I asked why you want to save the guy who left you with nowhere to go. Didn't you hear me, First Division? And then, Ji-yu says, Kangchi, why are you here? And then we see her face has literally been vandalized on by obviously Hoya. She says, you survived, and she is still in her nurse or hospital clothes. We then see all three of them, and then Hoya just says, hi. She says, what relief, Kangchi. She even thought about him all the time. She also remembered, do you remember what I told you after the first test was over at the camp? Because she called him not qualified. And then she says, the one that wasn't qualified was me. And then she says, I am sorry. The three of them then look behind each other, and then they start to giggle because of what's on her face. She then says, why are you avoiding me? And Hoya and Sunlight Kim are just trying to keep it in. She says, how can I make it up? Please tell me. We are then inside some sort of hall or basketball court. Oh, I hope it is. We then see the blonde-haired lady, and she says, what do you think, Ju-yu? Can you start again? And this girl literally has so much drip, and she looks pretty menacing with her red eyes. Ji-yu then says, yes, I can. And then, of course, the lady turns around and begins to giggle. And Ji-yu says, what? You too? And then she says, Han Kang-chi, your goal is to save Master Yeonpum, right? Our 4th division can help with that. She says, I have a debt to repay to Master Yeonpum, and instead I'll repay you, with a team member next to you. Kangchi says, a team member next to me. And then we see, of course, it is Ji-yu, and she looks around like me. And we still see her vandaled face, and this is pretty funny, considering her powers are literally that of a dog or a wolf. She says, yes, you should be helping him team up. And then she says, I don't want to. She says, I want to work in the 4th division. She mentions that that's part of the 4th division's work as well, and it's very important. And you're not just trying to do the task that you want to do, right? And Ji-yu says, yeah. The blonde girl then says, if you're uncomfortable with a low number of team members, don't worry about that. There's one more person who will be joining. And we see Dae Young with a cast. And of course, he is very shocked by this as well. He says, you're here, Ji-yu. And then Ji-yu says, Dae Young? Dae Young says it must be weird that the guy who almost died suddenly went on a vacation. And I bet it was difficult to explain to our family and persuade them, but was a month maybe too long. Ji-yu literally sets up on fire and she's angry. And Dae Young says, chill, as we see his left arm gone and I forgot he lost it. And then boom, she goes to him and hugs him, and she starts to cry, saying, I won't ask you what happened or what you've been through, but I'll understand, so don't go anywhere else, okay? As we see them, and Kangchi is just looking, and she says, thank you for being alive, Oppa. He then smiles, saying, I'm the same as dead, to the ghost monster. He says, I was brought back from the dead and reborn, thanks to a certain hero, as he looks at Kangchi. He says, I don't remember what happened before, so let's start again and work together, Kangchi. And then, of course, Ji-yu says, what is this? Because Dae Young pointed out what happened to her face, and that she is literally making Hoya go back and forth. The lady with blonde hair says, change into this first, and then let's talk later. Ji-yu says, this is the 4th division uniform though, why are you putting it on? And Kangchi just says, I don't know. And Dae Young says, getting dressed with gyps is really difficult. Attention, and it is Sunlight Kim, and she's calling them to listen. She says this is a deeply intrusive mission, and what you have to do suits such intrusive guys like you. She then gives them a very smug look, and she says, I can't allow a bunch of weaklings like you to be on a hero team. And then they say, I said I won't do it. I don't want to be in a team. And then we see a sudden shadow come over them, and boom, she literally sits on them, but then they manage to escape. She says, I, Sunlight Kim, carry the name of the 4th Division's chief in charge, and I will correct your softy temperaments. And she has gotten serious. Hoya then says, will they be okay, Miss Engineer? And she says she's going full out from the beginning. And then she says, of course, she has a rough side to her, but among us, she has the strongest sense of ambition, and Hoya agrees. The engineer then turns away, saying, come Hoya-nim, if we're late, it'll be difficult to handle the master. And then Hoya looks outside and says, it's going to rain. He says, I can smell the scent of rain, as we see the clouds start to turn gray outside the beautiful and large facility. We then see a dead dog, and we see some guy wearing a hat, and he gives a menacing smile. We see multiple dead animals with their insides literally eaten out, and he is wearing a hat with dead black roses. And then we see him here, and he has 2 left eyes, and I think this guy is going to be a real problem. Sunlight Kim. I've heard of her before. She's the 4th Division's ace instructor, as she is sitting there with her arms and legs crossed, and guys, she is literally, I just noticed this now, way huger than the average person. This girl really is just so buff. Of course, Dae Young says she looks strong from the outside, but that cannot hide what really makes her the division's ace. He says, look at that facial expression. It means that she must have a special ability if she is that cocky. We then see, of course, Kangxi and Dae Young attack her instantly, and she gets sent flying, and then Ji-Yu kicks her up again, and then she seems to have taken it all on. She says it's my turn now, and then Dae Young says, time out. I request a strategic timeout. We will start over and thank you for your consideration. And then he says to the both of them, what the heck do you think you're doing? He says, what would we do if you just rush in swinging like that? You're not idiots, huh? And then they ask each other, didn't we do teamwork training at the camp? We can work together back then. And then, of course, Ji-Yu and Kangxi said, we did it the same as back then, and they literally just ditched the plan. Dae Young then says, I know this sudden test is ridiculous, but that's what this place has always done. He says, as we look at an image of Sunlight Kim, our opponent is strong and we don't know anything about her abilities, and in order for that, we need to have a strategy or it will be inefficient and dangerous. Ji-Yu says, oh yeah, you're right, and I guess she said so sarcastically. She then has her head down and mentions, a skillless person like me should deserve death. Honestly, she is such a Debbie Downer. She says, as she literally looks so gloomy, I tried to decide whether you're qualified or not. And then Kangxi just says, it's alright, it's alright. And then she remembers Kyun-hee and says, a fool deceived by thinking that they knew their senior's unknown identity. That is me. She then bows down in anguish, saying, I'm useless garbage. Call me a worm. And then she says, no, I apologize to worms. This is too funny. Dae Young says, anyways, even if our opponent is strong, there should be certain loopholes that they can use. And then Sunlight Kim literally teleports behind him like instant transmission and says, you are done, right? And then he looks back saying, wait madame, we haven't even introduced ourselves yet. And Sunlight Kim says, just wrap it up fast. And then she says, you know what? Will your opponent give you timeout? And then she said it ends here. She steps on the ground and all 3 of them get sent floating into the air. We see Kangxi and he's ready to give a punch, but he misses. And then he literally makes a blunder. We see the 3 of them still up top, and he says, an ignorant musclehead, a blunderer, and a blonde with good teeth. And then she punches all of them in succession. We then see them literally still affected by the punch midair, and they get sent flying towards the wall, and they eventually crash into it. Ji-Yu says, what kind of skill is that? I don't know, I'm seeing it for the first time too. We then see her literally jump up again, and her feet and her legs are crossed, and she's about to literally crush them. Boom, they manage it to dodge one last time, and she says, it's said that the leader of lions usually use their bodies to crush the other lion spirit. And then she holds up 3 with her fingers and says, the next 3. If you can avoid 3 out of 5 stomps, it is your win, as she leaps up in the air and comes down once more. We then see a stopwatch in her aura, and she smiles, or actually sorry, she gives a glooming look mentioning, from now on, I will control your time. They say this is the feeling again. I started feeling it again. It was just like back then. And we see Ji-Yu as she is facing Gobble, and she mentions when I couldn't do anything. This is the same. Kangxi says, you've really changed, Ji-Yu, to not give up in the face of despair. And that is their job. She says that's what only the employees do, not us interns, right? We have almost no way of winning. Dae Young says, yes, I agree with Ji-Yu. However, that's why we have one thing left. We then go to a jungle where we see a blonde-haired teen with a white headband as well as a black-haired, short-haired kid. They then land on the ground and say, "This is Tree 3. We've arrived at the scene," as we see all of the pets with the dismembered bodies. The blonde hair with the headband says, "How terrible, was this a tiger?" And then the black-haired kid says, "Beasts hunt to feed themselves and that they don't massacre." The blonde girl then says, "Mountain 1, this is Tree 3. We've arrived at the destination, and the situation is way more serious than we thought." And then her companion says, "Wait, is that Jack?" As we see the corpse of Jack literally on the ground with his ribs missing and his skin peeled off. He says, "Q and he looked for you everywhere, so you were here and in this place." She dispatches saying, "This is Tree 2 and we found Jack's corpse." But then Jack gets up from the ground and is about to bite her. Of course, a blonde says, "What, Jack, where?" And then she says, "Tree 2, question." And then we see Jack, or whatever this undead creature is, behind the blondie with a headband, and then the monster says, "What's 14 times 44? 3, 2, 1. And I think he needs to get some math classes because the answer is obviously 617 or 16, I don't really know. We then see the reflection of the wolf in her eyes, and then we see somebody's head come out, and he says, "Time is up." Boom, he literally bites off half of her body, and the chapter comes to an end. We see the three of them jump off from the ground and they launch towards Sunlight Kim. Keiichi tries to uppercut her, but he dodges, and the two of them try to go for the hit. She says, "So you're finally using your heads and attacking me one after the other. Though for such a sloppy strategy, I will not give you recognition," as she stomps on the ground and they get sent flying up. Keiichi tries to punch her again, while the two of them remain suspended in air. She punches all three of them with ease and says, "I had some expectations, but you guys are literally pathetic," as they come crashing down. And before you know it, she's already in the air, and she uses Crushing Drop, which is the name of her literal sitting technique, and the three of them barely manage to evade it. She says, "My mercy ends here. I'll use my full speed from now on to get this over with," as she leaps into the air like a diva, and she lands perfectly on both of her feet like she is some sort of gymnast. She says nothing will work against me because she controls time. And of course, Ji-Yu and Keiichi are like, "What the heck?" And then Dae Young says, "Yes, because Ji-Yu said, do you get it?" He says 3 stomps. If we just target these 3, we can win. He says we only have one opportunity, so let's go. We then see them continue to get beat up by her so easily as they get hit and put up against the wall. He says the first attack is Crushing Drop, and our boy Dae Young gets wrecked. She says first one was a failure. 2 more chances left. Also, only 2 of you guys are left, and so she will bring them to their knees at every opportunity. She leaps up like she's some sort of angel, and then we find out that after she uses a skill, she shows off, but distances herself away from us. It's like she's trying to buy time. He concludes that it has a long cooldown. We then see, as she is in the air, we see Dae Young's hand on her. He uses light armor and he says activate, but then she literally rips apart the hand, and he says that's fast. She mentions and tells Dae Young, "You acted like your arms were gone, but hid them and planned a secret attack. Do you think I'd fall for such a shallow?" But then we see Keiichi is already below her. And Dae Young just says, "That stomp attack earlier was a bit strange. Me and Ji-Yu couldn't move our bodies right after we were hit." But then he says, "But one person was different. Even after that, he could still move. Like you couldn't control him with your ability." And then we see Keiichi was not affected by the stomp skill as he races towards her. She then lands saying, "You observed well that it has a long cooldown. It's the flaw in that perfect skill. But the second attack is the most unpleasant thing I've ever heard." And then she says while she's still mid-air, "A small fry tries to defeat me. It's the first thing I've heard something ridiculous in my life, and this is such a pretty funny panel, as we literally see her in the air like a bird and Keiichi ready to attack." She says, "The long cooldown time applies if I want to stomp on more than 2 people, but I've already hit 1 person, so there is no cooldown." And Dae Young says, "Dang it, I didn't think she'd stop there." And then he says, "Well, we've got you." And we see our boy Kang-chi literally go and hug her, and she literally has a six-pack, by the way, guys. So he hugs her, and it seems that they have won. He then uses Stomp himself, and Dae Young says, the Stomp is a skill that stops the other person's time. But what if they're touching you? Moving will become difficult, as we see a sort of graph right here. He says Kang-chi would catch you without you noticing, and the mechanical arm was just a trick. He says when she was explaining the test earlier, she told us how to pass, but she didn't tell us how to win, right? And Dae Young says we'll defeat her using the same rule. And then, guys, we see it is Dae Young, and she literally just sits on her face using crushing drop just like Sunlight Kim does. And oh gosh, this has to be really humiliating. We see Ji-Yoo on the ground, and her head literally has a bump on it. And nonetheless, she still jumps up in the air happily and excitingly. And she says, we really did it. I guess Ji-Yoo really is just a very unique one. She then looks very happy as she approaches Kang-chi, saying, it's my first time being acknowledged, and from Instructor Nim's test. I never thought that'd be possible. I was finally acknowledged. And we see Dae Young in the background, and her boy is literally knocked out. Dae Young says, hey, my ribs were fractured from this. Is that really something to celebrate? If this mission was a real one, I would have already died. And they're just there, literally doing a little dance. And then he says, she doesn't even care. Strong people really annoy the heck out of me. He then says, there happened to be a delay when she wanted to attack him with another stomp, as if something helped him. He looks at Kang-chi and says, I'm sure Kang-chi has something up his sleeve. He then tells Ji-Yoo, you finally returned to your previous self. And she's like, what? He says, I have missed you. And of course, she starts to blush. Our boy got that riz. He says, I miss you, Ji-Yoo-C. And then she literally grabs his head and makes him bow, saying, what are you saying all of a sudden, you crazy kid? And then Sunlight Kim just looks at them, and she is kind of happy. She then starts to walk away and says, you were acting like you were about to die a few days ago. I can't believe you're that happy to have completed the test. She says, what a simple one. She gets flashbacks towards when she was a soldier, I guess, and says, if I compare you to back then. And we see Ji-Yoo as a kid. She says, you've grown up a lot on Ji-Yoo. She smiles, saying, I'm so sentimental. You're not qualified to be a instructor, Sunlight. So I'm guessing she just really roasted herself. She then sees a wolf in front of her, and she says, what? You are Jack. And then she starts to go after him, saying, where did you go? Do you know for how long we've been looking for you? And then she says, wait, as she notices the blood around him. And then behind him are the bodies of the 4th Division members. We then go back to Hyun-hee's imposter eating some sort of steak, and we see her evil little teeth behind her real ones. She says, and the guy in front, below the stairs, says, how is it, President? Does it suit your taste? The quality of this meat is good, but how are the flavor and texture so rich and perfect? He says, I see, the quality of the meat is important, but isn't the most important thing should be how should it be cooked, President? And then the President, or Hyun-hee, starts to walk down the stairs and says, we're walking on the same path, but our walking heights are different. Don't you think so, Kwak Dae-kwan? And then she says, because you worked well with us all this time, we'll work with you until the end, and we have to continue walking together, should we not? As she puts her hand on his head, and then he says, yes, President. And then she says, however, there are people who hate our corporation, a selfish group that emphasizes only their righteousness. The evil of this era, as we see Yeonpong without a face or some of his face missing. She says, the evil of this era is the heroes. We then see she has transformed into Yeonpong without his literal face, and she says, it's not that we're scared of him. The only one we fear is Yeonpong. This is so hype, guys. I think Yeonpong knows something that we don't. She says, now Yeonpong is in my hands, as we see the engineer and Hoya are looking shocked. And then she says the reasons why we were afraid and couldn't move, we don't have them anymore. And we see some sort of lady in a dress being bound by these purple evil chains. And we find out that this is Hero's 4th Division leader, number 3 out of 8, nicknamed the Mountain Anxiety. Kim San-suwa. We see the engineer and Hoya, and she says, a fishy smell? He says, yes, at first I thought it was a smell of rain, but when I smelled it again, it was different. It had a nastier smell. And he says, did you already know? And then we get a call, and he picks it up saying, Mountain 1, this is Tree 3, we've arrived at the destination. The situation is more severe than... And then it cuts as he says, this is Mountain 1, what did you say, Tree 3? Repeat. And then he says, what's wrong with us again? I have to change the radio once more. They arrive at the door, and Miss Engineer says, we have to meet Master, but if you don't pay attention, you'll be in great danger. He says, me? Master thinks I'm super cute, so it doesn't matter. And then the engineer opens the door, and she says, should I ask her? And then we see she gets shot. We then see Ji-yu, and she says, are you Jack? And she gets a flashback to Jack and Kyun-hee. What a cute panel. She says, you're not Jack. Who the heck are you? As we literally have Sunlight Kim's head covered in blood on the ground. Of course, Dae Young says high cognition, freedom of awakener condition, strong sense of character. This guy is definitely a grade orange, no, even a grade red. As he lies on the floor, he says, I can't believe a red is walking around freely in a hero's building. And how could this happen? He says it's the same as that guy, as he notices that they both had stars on their face. As we remember that big dude wearing Under Armour back in the last few chapters. He says, was that red perhaps? And then, the guy says, do you remember my coworker from 1 month ago? He was weak, ugly, and had a pure heart. His name was Big Judy. He says as he looks at Kang-chi and Ji-yu, he was a child of my own blood, and the camp was a very painful time for him. It didn't pain me to hide my identity. What pained me was that I had to hold my urges, to not rip out the neck of the person that was standing next to me, and it was Ji-yu. And then we see that Kyun-hee, or the imposter, said something, that she would give him a chance. And in the end, the owner kept her promise. And he says, after a long time of holding it in, I was given a sweet treat. As we see, he left so many bodies behind him. He says a treat to eat all of you, and a chance to judge you with my teeth for all the evil deeds you've done for me. Dae Young says that he's too dangerous and they have to run away immediately. Ji-yu then says, let me ask you one thing, and Dae Young knows that she's probably going to say something out of emotion. She says, the owner that chewed up Rabbit Hat, where is she? And she says, what have you done to our instructor? As we see the man, or Jack the Ripper vibes, literally there with red eyes, and he has no remorse. She says, answer me. And of course, Dae Young says no. And then she literally transforms into a dog and attacks him, saying, I said, answer me. We then see his 3 sort of eyes on his left side and says, if you want to see her so badly, would you like to go with her? And he says, inside me. And his belly, or his torso, literally becomes the mouth opening of a werewolf, and Kang-chi manages to dive in and get Ji-yu out from his grasp. Dae Young then clicks something, and it seems like one of his arms. It is T-002. He says it is not good at attacking, but it is good at avoiding fights. He uses rocket mode, and it literally becomes a rocket and says system activating booster. He puts it on, and he carries them away as soon and as far as he can. He says, get a grip, Ji-yu. This guy would be the death of us. And then he says, correct. And that monster is literally flying as well. And he says running away is the only answer to survival. Of course, Dae Young says secure an escape route T-002. And then the system says ascending with the best escape route, as we see the outside of the headquarters. We see them in the air, and he says we have to get to the center quickly and tell the teachers, so please hang in there. But then we see it is the dog, and it literally just bites off the hand. He says, question, what's the probability of escaping from me? As we see them mid-air, and the 3 of them are shocked by what's behind them. And Jack, the dog, and the Ripper just stand there ready to eat their prey. And they say the chance is 0%. We see the monster and the humanity guy, a human shaking hands. And we see that finally, regarding the representatives of the Association of Humanity and Araraka, they have successfully signed a peace treaty. And then the news reporter says, the era of peace has finally begun, as it is in a big screen in the building that's almost destroyed. And the soldiers look up. Everybody cheers and they say, yes, the war is over. And we see Sunlight Kim leaning back against the fence, and she thinks she's an MC protagonist. Somebody says, aren't you happy about the war ending? And she says, what do you think of this ending? Of course, it is a main hero, the #1 hero in the world, and he says, I'm happy more than anyone in this world. And his name is Lightning Man. Sunlight Kim says, I don't know, Lightning Man. I thought our victory wasn't far away. And then she says, I wanted their skin to peel off. And then Lightning Man says, how could you say something like that in front of a child? And he covers GU's ears. He tells GU, as you can see, they are existing normally. A child that was the unhappiest will now be able to live in the happiest era. And he tells Sunlight to protect his child from now on with love. And GU looks really skeptical about her because she seems very intimidating. And her cute shirt says Blossom. She says love, and for a tiny kid, you've got a really, really good glare. We then go back to what is currently happening, and we see Jack with his mouth wide open about to eat Dae Young. He says we're about to get eaten, but then GU gets ahead of the pack, or the two of them, and they're like, what's going on? She gets bit intentionally, and then Jack says, was that your final effort? And she says it was part of my strategy. She says I just needed some blood, and she smears the blood across her face. She says, I'm only starting now. We then go back to the flashback, and Lightning Man says, bye, I've got lots of work to do, and Sunlight says, wait. She says, it's your will, so I'll follow it unconditionally, but you want me to love and protect her? I've never done that before. And he says, create a peaceful family and live in this peaceful era. If she does something bad, scold her. Steer her towards the right path. As she looks at GU, Lightning Man says, those kinds of peaceful things are the greatest love in this world. We then go back to the HQ, and we see a huge thing fall to the ground, and it is Jack. We then see the head of the wolf literally coming out from his stomach, and he's nervous, saying, I can't believe it. He says that is a werewolf. Our girl GU was literally a hiding werewolf. That is so awesome. This is a transformation grade unknown and the model werewolf wolf human. He says, I thought all werewolves were killed when the count fell in the period. And he says, I guess it's not true. As we see GU, and she looks very bloodlusted and furious, but she seems like a mythical creature right here, and Dae Young is left speechless. He then gets an image in his head and says, GU can only transform into a dog. That pose she did from earlier was for that transformation, as we see it right here. And I guess that this was what happens when she uses blood to transform. She then jumps towards Jack and misses her first attack, and Jack says, is it a blessing that you came to me, or is it the grace of the remaining guys? And he says, I can't ever let this get by, and he says, I will capture you. We then see the wolf tries to bite GU, but the teeth cannot even pierce her, and she literally just continues attacking him. He says her speed went up by so much, and he has a problem evading her. And then we see her once again jump towards Jack, and he says, you're beyond my expectations. But then, we then see some sort of black sort of goo with eyes come out of him, and he has her in his grasp. But then we see her, and boom, she yells out a roar or a howl, and it instantly gets knocked away. He says love truly is great, as Lightning Man walks into the sunset. He says with love, you can save anyone. He gives GU a piece of chocolate, and GU just looks at Sunlight Kim like thank you so much. We then go back, and then we also find out that with love, you can kill anyone, and we see the dismembered mask of Sunlight Kim on the ground. GU then launches towards Jack, and then Jack says, I thought you could take some punches, but I can't pierce her at all, and if this goes on, I'll die. And then we see a lot of eyes on his face as long as horns from his nose, and he says, I have no other choice but to use that. And we see a huge mouth open wide. We then see the explosion, and Kang-chi and Dae Young look up, and they say, what is that? We then see somebody standing there menacingly. And then he says, "Is that the monster? No, Anjayu, where did you go?" As we see the Jack, and he literally seems to be a complete demon now, with literal mouths on the rest of his body. We see Dae Young, and it seems that he has just awoken from his slumber. He then walks out, and he seems to have been startled by something. His mom and dad introduce him and say, "Oh my, Dae Young, you just woke up? Here, do you want to introduce yourself? This is your sister, and you will be living together from now on." As we literally see a little version of Ji-Yu just standing there with her hands on her side. He looks kind of unpleasant, and he walks away. And his mom is like, "Dae Young," and then she crouches down to tell Ji-Yu. He's like that when I talk to him. He's still not used to this, so don't worry about it. And she looks very gloomy. But then we see a dog or a stuffed toy, and he gives it to her. And it is Dae Young, and he says, "This is a gift." And he smiles, saying, "Let's get along well, my sister." What an awesome panel. She starts to cry, and she says, "Yes, come on, let's do this." We then are back to Jack, and then we see Dae Young saying, "Dae Young, oppa." He says, "Oh, so that's what you guys were," and he understands now. And he stands there saying, "That's why you have that expression on your face," as you see him literally bawling his eyes out. He says, "Is this real? This must be a lie," as we see Dae Young on the other half of his face. He says he was determined to fight in the face of death, and he's not scared to die, but he was not prepared to lose a family member. As we see Ji-Yu here hugging the little dog there, and it looks super, super cute, and I can't believe that that isn't a real dog. And then Jack begins to laugh, saying, "I'm sorry, Dae Young. Since earlier, I've been disgusted with your face, thinking you would win." But now he's happy that he has that really gloomy expression of despair, as he's literally crouching down there. He then says, "The day of grace to have the revenge of subordinates and the envious werewolf. Since it's such a nice day, I'll allow you a favor. Become a part of me as well, and your sister and you will be one." He then opens his mouth and uses teeth prison. But then, suddenly, it disappears. And then he says, "How did you stop me, spiky hair?" As we see Kang-chi, and he jumped in front of Dae Young to save him. We then see, of course, it is Kang-chi with a bloody nose and a closed eye due to bruising, and he seems to be in a corner tied up. He says, "Teacher, why am I tied up here?" And Yeonpong says, "You were almost beaten to death by me, and you just woke up." He says, "I know that's because it happens often, but why am I tied up here?" And then he says, "What is that cut on your neck? Did I do that?" He says, "Oh, this is so annoying. It'll take a while to heal, and I'm going to cover it up for a while." And then he's like, "Did I really do that?" And it seems Kang-chi really did injure Yeonpong. Yeonpong says, "Your source of power is anger, and that source can be amplified until the end." And he says, "An outrageous being." As we see, literally the whole room seems to have been damaged. Kang-chi says, "Are you saying that I went wild?" And Yeonpong says, "You don't need to know." He crouches down with his fan, and then he literally spits out blood. He says, "Your ribs were all crushed, your liver and lung ruptured, and if you hadn't hit your acupuncture point, this guy would have died, so Kang-chi should be thanking Yeonpong." He says, "Just focus on getting used to your anger, and if you don't, your anger will drive you wild, and it will eventually kill you." The other two assistants go towards Kang-chi and say, "The intern's condition seems to be severe today, Master." And Yeonpong just says, "Shut up and don't worry about me." Yeonpong looks behind him and says, "If a time comes where I need this power, can I use it?" And then Yeonpong says, "Why are you asking me that?" And then we see Kang-chi, and something seems to be happening to him. And we see a lot of aura come out from him, and it literally begins to explode. Our boy really is going Super Saiyan. We see it is at 25%, 75%, and we see a bull start to form behind him. And Dae Young is like, "What the heck?" 95%, and then it reaches 100, but then the literal battery shatters, and it reaches 101, and it keeps going, and he reaches a maximum. Yeonpong says, "Why are you asking me that? It is your power, and you should ask yourself that." And then he smiles, saying, "Whether it's time for you to die or to take someone down, whether it's time for you to protect someone, or whether it's time, you should die." We then see Kang-chi, and our boy has white hair with a fiery aura, and the bull is on fire too, and his eyes are literal sparkling like the stars. And this is Awake XXX, and this seems to be 10 million%. We see Kang-chi and her boy has literally become Gojo, except with orange eyes with swords in them. And he has gotten his anger in control, and her boy is really about to crush Sukuna. Just kidding, he's going to crush Jack.
Hey guys, what's up? Thank you guys for making it to the end. Make sure to comment down below which your favorite hero is, and make sure to let me know as well some manhwa recommendations that you want me to do. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.